The Nevada night is a vast and silent thing. It settles over the desert like a great, dark blanket, its edges stitched with the cold, hard light of a million distant suns. Out here, beneath this immense celestial dome, the world feels both ancient and profoundly empty. The dry air carries a slight chill, a reminder of the day's heat now bled away into the infinite black. If you listen, truly listen, the silence isn't silent at all. It's a soft symphony of subtle sounds, the faint, papery rustle of a dry creosote bush, the whisper of a wayward breeze moving across the sand, and the almost imperceptible electric hum of the universe itself. It is in this place of quiet majesty, under these same indifferent stars, that our story begins. Not with a bang, but with a vanishing. To the east, the silhouette of the Groom Lake Range cuts a jagged black line against the slightly lighter sky. Nestled within its hidden valleys lies a place known only by a number, 51. By day, it is a fortress of secrecy, its runways and hangars buzzing with activity known only to a select few. But at this hour, in the deepest part of the night, even that place seems to slumber, just another shadow in a landscape of shadows. Yet, it is the gravitational center of our tale, the silent, unmoving object around which the lives of three men once orbited. Their names, for now, are just whispers on the dry wind. Dr. Emil Vance, a theoretical physicist with a mind that danced on the edges of known reality. Dr. Finch, an engineer who could make the improbable solid and functional. And Dr. Aris Thorne, a specialist in exotic materials, a man who understood the language of matter itself. They were not soldiers or spies, but thinkers. Their world was one of chalkboards dense with equations, of laboratory hums, and the precise glow of monitoring screens. They were drawn to this remote desert outpost by the promise of the ultimate puzzle, the chance to work on projects that pushed the very boundaries of human understanding. For a time, their lives followed the strange, cloistered rhythm of the facility. Long days, confidential briefings, and the quiet camaraderie of those who share immense, unspeakable burdens. Their work, by its very nature, became the entirety of their existence. Then, without fanfare or explanation, that rhythm stopped. The precise sequence of their days simply ceased. One evening, they were present, their security badges logging their exit as they departed for their off-site housing quarters in the small, unassuming town of Rachel. By the next morning, they were gone. Not a single personal item remained in their homes. Their beds were neatly made, as if awaiting a return that would never come. Their cars sat dormant in the driveways, coated in a fine layer of desert dust. No frantic calls were made, no goodbyes whispered, no signs of struggle left behind. It was a disappearance of utter completeness, as if they had calmly and deliberately stepped out of their own lives and melted into the immense, waiting desert. The official records would later call it resignation, a sudden decision to pursue private interests. But the silence they left behind was deafening, a void filled only with questions. Who were these men, these brilliant minds who traded the visible world for one of shadows and secrecy? What fragments of reality did they piece together in their isolated labs? What whispers of otherworldly physics did they hear in the data? And what, in the end, did they discover that was so profound, so potentially disruptive, that the only possible outcome was for them, and perhaps their knowledge, to simply fade from the earth, leaving behind nothing but the cool desert wind and a mystery wrapped in starlight? To understand the depth of their disappearance, we must first remember the fullness of their presence. These were not faceless government assets or abstract minds in lab coats. They were men of flesh, habit, and quiet aspiration, each with a world they left behind. The first, Dr. Emil Vance, was a man who saw the universe in its underlying mathematics. Before the desert, his world was the hallowed, ivy-covered halls of Princeton, where he was a beloved, if somewhat absent-minded, professor. His students recalled a man whose eyes would light up when describing the elegant dance of quantum entanglement, his hands often stained with chalk dust. At home in a small, book-cluttered faculty house, his sanctuary was a backyard telescope. He would spend hours with his young daughter, Clara, pointing out constellations, teaching her that the pinpricks of light were not just stars, but stories and scientific marvels waiting to be understood. His dream, he once confessed to a colleague, was not fame, but to add one single, truthful sentence to the grand story of physics. Across the country, in the sun-drenched aerospace hubs of Southern California, Dr. Leo Finch was solving problems of a more tangible nature. If Vance pondered the why of the universe, Finch mastered the how. A lead engineer at a cutting-edge aviation firm, he was the man you wanted in the room when a prototype refused to fly or a material strained under impossible forces. His hands, often nicked and lightly scarred, could translate the most radical blueprints into cold, hard reality. His life was one of orderly precision. Early morning swims, a meticulously restored 1970 Corvette, and Sunday dinners with his wife, Elena, and their two teenage sons. His pride was not in patents, though he held several, but in the silent, sustained flight of an aircraft that logic said shouldn't be airborne. He sought the thrill of the tangible breakthrough, the satisfying click of a perfect mechanical union. The third man, Dr. Aris Thorne, operated in the space between Vance's theories and Finch's machines. A materials scientist of rare instinct, he was the alchemist of the trio. Working for a private defense contractor in Virginia, Thorne's expertise lay in the bizarre and the resilient. He developed alloys that could remember their shape, ceramics that could withstand the heat of reentry, and composites that seemed to whisper secrets about energy dispersion. A quiet, introspective man, his passion bled into his personal life through his exquisite, intricate woodworking. In his garage workshop, he would shape cherry and walnut into beautiful, smooth forms, a tactile counterpoint to his day job analyzing metallic fragments of unknown origin. He was a widower, his children grown, and his life had settled into a rhythm of deep work and solitary craftsmanship, a man most at peace when deciphering the hidden properties of a substance. These were their lives: classrooms, workshops, family dinners, and personal hobbies under ordinary sunsets. They were driven by a shared, profound curiosity, a need to poke at the boundaries of the possible. Vance, with his equations, sought to map the unseen architecture of reality. Finch, with his relentless pragmatism, sought to build a ladder to reach it. Thorne, with his intimate knowledge of matter, sought to provide the rungs. Their paths converged not by accident, but because a singular, shadowy project required this exact, rarefied combination of genius. The offers that came to them were shrouded in vague language, but pulsed with the promise of working on the ultimate frontier of applied science. The call of the unknown, coupled with a sense of profound duty, proved irresistible. Each, in their own way, packed up a portion of their world, said tentative goodbyes with promises of regular communication, and set their course for the stark, isolated landscape of Nevada. They arrived as masters of their respective domains, eager to contribute their piece to what they believed would be mankind's greatest technological leap. None of them, with all their collective intelligence and foresight, could have predicted what truly awaited them in the silent, watchful desert. The final day began with the deceptive normalcy of a routine that had, over months, become ingrained. The sun rose over the Groom Lake Range, casting long, sharp shadows across the desert floor. At precisely 6:45 a.m., a dusty sedan turned off the extraterrestrial highway onto the unmarked access road, its passage recorded by a high-resolution security camera mounted on a weathered pole. The grainy, black-and-white footage, later scrutinized endlessly, shows Dr. Aris Thorne at the wheel, his face a study of calm focus behind the windshield. He passes through the first, outer checkpoint with a familiar wave to the guard, a Marine whose identity is forever redacted in any released documents. Thorne's movements are unhurried, utterly ordinary. Dr. Leo Finch arrived next at 7:02 a.m. in his recognizable Corvette. The security footage from the main gate shows him exchanging a few brief words with the sentry, even sharing what appears to be a short laugh, a moment of human connection that now feels haunting. He then proceeds to the S4 facility parking area, a secured lot nestled against a mountainside. A different camera, one monitoring the entrance to the underground labs, captures him swiping his keycard. The timestamp reads 7:18 a.m. He pauses to hold the heavy blast door for a junior technician carrying a box of equipment, a simple act of courtesy. The technician, in a later, heavily mediated interview, would recall only that Dr. Finch seemed, like he always did, focused but not stressed. Just another Wednesday. Dr. Emil Vance, ever the academic, was the last to arrive at 7:35 a.m., having reportedly stopped at the on-site cafeteria for an extra cup of coffee. Witnesses from within the administrative wing remember seeing him in the hallway, a manila folder tucked under his arm, nodding absently to colleagues as he walked toward the theoretical physics wing. His last confirmed electronic signature is on a digital request form for a specific computational simulation, logged at 9:47 a.m. The subject line is mundane, technical, giving nothing away. His last human interaction was with a lab assistant, to whom he handed a handwritten note with a series of complex equations, asking her to input them when the mainframe queue cleared. She remembers his final words. "Let's see what this geometry yields." The workday proceeded without known incident. There were no alarms, no raised voices, no indication of anything amiss. The internal log shows all three men accessing their designated, separate labs, their keycards pinging at various doors throughout the morning and early afternoon. Then, a subtle shift begins. At 3:14 p.m., Finch's card accesses a rarely used materials analysis bay on sublevel 2, a room Thorne had booked for calibration diagnostics. At 3:31 p.m., Vance's card logs entry to the same bay. For 47 minutes, there is no electronic trace of them. At 4:18 p.m., all three keycards are used in rapid succession to exit the S4 facility via a rear egress tunnel that leads to the above-ground parking lot. This is the last time their identities are electronically verified within the confines of Area 51. The external gate cameras tell the final, perplexing chapter. Thorne's sedan is seen leaving at 4:52 p.m., followed by Finch's Corvette at 4:55 p.m. Vance's government-issued vehicle departs at 4:58 p.m. They turn onto the empty highway, heading not towards their homes in Rachel, but westward, into the vast, open desert. A satellite tracking algorithm, part of the base's perimeter security, lost definitive signal on all three vehicles approximately 23 miles from the facility, near a sprawling, ancient dry lake bed. Their personal cell phones stopped registering on any network at exactly the same time, 5:16 p.m. Back at their residences, dinners grew cold. Calls went straight to voicemail. The mundane expectations of evening, a family call, a workout, a quiet hour in the workshop, went perpetually unfulfilled. Three men had entered the facility that morning, their presence meticulously documented. As the desert night swallowed the last of the twilight, a chilling truth settled over the few who knew to look. None of them, in any verifiable sense, ever left. To comprehend the silence that swallowed these three men, one must first listen to the whispered history of the place that employed them. Area 51 was not born from a single decree, but from a specific, urgent need in the cold, thin air of the Cold War. In 1955, a team from Lockheed Skunk Works, led by the legendary Kelly Johnson, surveyed the remote, salt-flat rim of Groom Lake. They sought a sanctuary, a place where the most audacious aviation secrets could take wing, shielded from prying Soviet eyes. The location was perfect, a natural bowl surrounded by mountains, within the vast security blanket of the Nevada test site. Almost overnight, a secret city sprang from the dust. Its official name was vague, Homey Airport, or sometimes simply the ranch. To the few who knew of its existence, it was a black hole where brilliant minds and revolutionary aircraft vanished, only to reshape the world years later. This became the facility's enduring rhythm. It was here that the U-2 Dragon Lady first soared to peer into denied territory, her slender silhouette a ghost against the stratosphere. The impossibly fast and angular state Route 71 Blackbird was conceived and tested on these runways, a machine that turned intelligence gathering into an art form of velocity and altitude. Later, the bat-like shape of the F-117 Nighthawk, the world's first operational stealth aircraft, proved that an airplane could become a shadow, radar invisible. Each project was a universe unto itself, sealed in a bubble of need-to-know compartmentalization. A mechanic working on landing gear might spend a career never knowing the true purpose of the aircraft he maintained. This culture of secrecy was not merely policy. It was the very DNA of the place, a silent religion where curiosity beyond one's assigned task was the gravest sin. The outside world's fascination with the base grew in direct proportion to its silence. In the 1980s, a man named Bob Lazar stepped into the public eye with extraordinary claims of working on recovered alien spacecraft within a subsection called S4. His story, whether taken as gospel or garbled myth, forever fused Area 51 in the public consciousness with the UFO phenomenon. It transformed the base from a mere secret military site into a modern-day Ark of the Covenant, a repository for technologies not of this world. This perception was only deepened by the government's decades-long policy of flat denial. The base simply did not exist on any map or in any official acknowledgement. To even speak its name was to venture into the realm of conspiracy. But what of the reality behind the mythology? Declassified documents and testimonies from former employees paint a picture of a premier flight test and evaluation center, a place where the bleeding edge of aerospace technology is poked, prodded, and flown to its absolute limits. Scientists and engineers here work on hypersonic propulsion, next-generation sensors, advanced avionics, and materials that defy conventional physics. The work is real, groundbreaking, and guarded with utmost seriousness. The legal warnings are not theater. The airspace is patrolled by aggressive security forces, and the surrounding terrain is seeded with motion sensors. It is a place where the future is built, one classified project at a time, under a blanket of profound silence. Disappearances, in the metaphorical sense, are part of its legacy. Careers vanish into its classified vaults. Families are told only that a spouse or parent is working on a government project. Normal life is suspended for the duration of a contract. Occasionally, a worker might resign abruptly, bound by lifelong secrecy agreements, their expertise and experiences locked away forever. Yet, these are administrative vanishings, the expected byproduct of a life in the black world. People fade from public view, but they do not physically vanish from their homes without a trace. They do not leave their cars, their wallets, their family photographs behind in a state of eerie, suspended animation. This is the critical, chilling distinction that sets our story apart. The disappearances of Vance, Finch, and Thorne did not follow the established script. They were not administrative reassignments or quiet retirements into anonymity. They were a physical, complete, and simultaneous severing from reality, occurring not to low-level technicians, but to 3 senior scientists with top-level clearance working in a uniquely sensitive compartment. The machinery of secrecy, designed to hide projects and ideas, was now seemingly invoked to hide the fate of the men themselves. The history of Area 51 is a tapestry woven with threads of advanced science, national security, and enduring myth. But this case, the silent, simultaneous evaporation of three brilliant minds, was a tear in that fabric, a different kind of mystery altogether, one that the old patterns could not explain. In the world outside the desert's silence, the mundane machinery of concern began to turn, slowly and reluctantly. It started with Elena Finch, waiting past midnight with a cooling dinner, her calls to Leo's cell bouncing into the void. By sunrise, a cold dread had settled in the households of all three families. The calls to the Lincoln County Sheriff's Office were marked by a growing, shared panic that transcended the usual worry of a missed check-in. These were not men who strayed. They were men of clockwork habit, whose lives were governed by schedules and protocols. Their simultaneous, complete radio silence was a profound anomaly. The sheriff's deputies who initially responded were polite, thorough, and utterly out of their depth. The Holmes and Rachel yielded no signs of forced entry or struggle, only an unsettling neatness, as if the occupants had been meticulously erased from their own spaces. The vehicles were gone, but no bank accounts had been touched. No credit cards were used. It was as if the three scientists had driven to the edge of the known world and simply stepped off. Faced with this, the local authorities did the only thing they could. They formally filed missing persons reports and, recognizing the glaring connection to the nearby restricted facility, notified federal authorities. This is where the first layer of official reality hardened. The Federal Bureau of Investigation, upon learning the missing individuals were employed at a sensitive Department of Defense installation, opened a preliminary inquiry. An agent from the Las Vegas field office was assigned. His progress was measured not in leads, but in closed doors. Requests for employment verification, access logs, and interview permissions with base personnel were met with a uniform, bureaucratic response from the Office of the Secretary of the Air Force. The phrase "matters of national security" was invoked like a sovereign incantation, rendering further inquiry not just difficult, but legally perilous. The agent's report, a heavily redacted version of which would later surface through a Freedom of Information Act request, concludes with palpable frustration, stating that cooperation from the employing facility was non-existent and that the investigation lacked actionable jurisdiction. For the families, the process became a haunting exercise in hitting a wall made of shadows. They hired a private investigator, a former police detective from Reno named Sam Carson. Carson, a pragmatic man used to finding people who didn't want to be found, hit the same immutable barrier, but from a different angle. His contacts in law enforcement went quiet when he mentioned Groom Lake. A source who claimed to be a former security contractor offered to meet, only to cancel repeatedly, his voice growing increasingly nervous over untraceable burner phones. The most telling moment came when Carson attempted to retrace the last known vehicular route, using the satellite data's general terminus near the dry lake bed. He found nothing, no skid marks, no debris, no evidence of any cars leaving the remote highway. It was as if the desert itself had opened up and swallowed them whole. The official paper trail, when it finally trickled out to next of kin after weeks of agonizing silence, was a masterpiece of omission. Personnel files were stripped to bare bones. Names, dates of employment, and a termination code listed simply as voluntary resignation, effective immediately. Security footage requests were denied. The statements from the base were delivered not by a person, but through sterile, official letters on letterhead, expressing regret for the family's distress, but citing the paramount requirements of compartmentalized security. The message was clear, cold, and absolute. The institution that had been the central fact of these men's professional lives now disavowed any knowledge of their fate. The more questions the families and their representatives asked, begging for just a sliver of truth, the thicker and more impenetrable the wall of silence grew. Behind the chain-link fences and beneath the sun-baked mountains, projects are not given names. They are assigned cryptonyms, strings of letters and numbers designed to confuse and conceal. But within the tight-lipped community of aerospace historians and ufologists, one particular cryptonym has echoed for years, often dismissed as myth: Project Dreamland. According to fragments of leaked correspondence, anonymous testimonies from retired personnel, and cross-referenced contract trails, this was not merely another stealth aircraft or sensor program. Dreamland, the whispers suggest, represented a fundamental shift in objective. It was not about building a better machine from known principles. Its stated, staggering goal was to understand and replicate a machine that was not built by human hands. The official objective, as inferred from tangential budget allocations and facility upgrades at the S-4 sector, was listed under the bland header, Advanced Propulsion and Materials Evaluation. In reality, insiders claim the project's core was reverse engineering. The premise, as fantastic as it sounds, is that a vehicle of unknown, non-terrestrial origin had come into the possession of the U.S. government in the late 1980s. Dreamland was the multi-generational effort to unlock its secrets. This was not about bolts and wiring. It was a forensic investigation of an entirely alien physics. Teams worked not with schematics, but with a physical artifact that defied conventional analysis, a craft that seemed to ignore known laws of inertia, propulsion, and material science. This is where the theoretical physics breakthroughs, or more accurately, the desperate theoretical reimaginings, began. Early reports from the project, smuggled out in fragments, spoke of materials with atomic structures arranged in impossible lattices, exhibiting what was termed metastability. They were lighter than carbon fiber, yet could withstand temperatures that would vaporize tungsten. More perplexing was the propulsion hypothesis. There were no engines, no exhaust nozzles, no visible power source. The leading theory, championed by a small group of theorists, involved the manipulation of local space-time, a technology that didn't push against air or expel mass, but essentially fell in a chosen direction by altering the gravitational field around the craft. To understand it, one didn't need just better engineers. One needed physicists willing to rewrite textbooks. This specific, monumental challenge explains why Vance, Finch, and Thorne were not just recruited, but were considered the indispensable trio. Their expertise formed a perfect, interlocking key. Dr. Emil Vance's work on quantum gravity and higher-dimensional geometry provided the theoretical framework. He was tasked with constructing the mathematical language to describe how such a propulsion system could function, a set of equations that might explain how to bend reality without breaking it. Dr. Leo Finch, the master engineer, faced the Herculean task of translation. His role was to take Vance's abstractions and Thorne's material analyses and conceive of testable hardware, of control systems and containment fields that could mimic, even in the smallest laboratory setting, the effects observed in the artifact. Dr. Aris Thorne was the crucial bridge. His analysis of the craft's hull material was the one tangible piece of the puzzle. By decoding its composition and energy dispersion properties, he aimed to provide the physical constants and material templates needed to make Finch's engineering and Vance's theories physically manifest. They were brought together at the peak of their careers, their minds uniquely suited to this one, unparalleled problem. For them, Dreamland was the ultimate expression of scientific pursuit, the chance to interact with a technology that represented a quantum leap beyond human ingenuity. They entered a world of controlled experiments, sealed labs, and data so sensitive it was never stored on networked computers, only on isolated, physical drives. They believed they were piecing together a new chapter for humanity. What they could not have foreseen, in their focus on equations and tensile strength, was that their work was leading them to a precipice. For the corollary to understanding a radically advanced technology is confronting the reality that made it possible. What they gradually discovered, piece by fractured piece, would challenge not just the boundaries of engineering, but everything we think we know about the fabric of reality itself. The heart of their work, the tangible mystery, lay in material samples no larger than a coin, kept under vacuum seal in a vibration-damped vault. These were not exotic alloys in the traditional sense. Under an electron microscope, Dr. Aris Thorne observed a structure that seemed to dance at the edge of perception. The atomic lattice was not a static, crystalline arrangement, but appeared to be in a state of controlled, resonant flux. It was as if the very bonds between atoms were not fixed, but could reconfigure in response to an external stimulus, be it an electrical charge, a magnetic field, or something else entirely. This property alone would have made it the most valuable substance on Earth. But this was only the first layer of the enigma. The physical properties these fragments exhibited were a catalog of impossibilities. Standard density tests returned fluctuating values. Sometimes it was light as balsa wood, other times it registered with the density of osmium, all without any change in mass or volume. It was a perfect thermal conductor in one direction, drawing heat away instantly, yet an absolute insulator in another, remaining stubbornly at ambient temperature. When subjected to force, it did not deform or fracture in a linear way. Instead, it seemed to disperse kinetic energy across its entire structure and even, according to one perplexing laser interferometer reading, slightly ahead of the point of impact, a finding that made Leo Finch question his instruments for weeks. But the most profound and ultimately disquieting observations came from the subtle, almost psychic-seeming interactions during testing. In a highly shielded lab, Thorne and his team attempted to measure the material's response to various EM frequencies. They found it was inert to most bands, but at certain specific, seemingly random harmonic intervals, it would resonate. This resonance wasn't just physical vibration. Sophisticated sensors picked up localized gravitational anomalies, microscopic shifts in weight, and faint, phantom electromagnetic pulses that matched no known source. The material wasn't just reacting. It was communicating on a level they could barely detect, let alone understand. It was during these resonance experiments that the scientists began reporting subjective, personal experiences that they were initially reluctant to document. Dr. Vance, observing a test, noted in a personal log a sensation of being watched from within the chamber. A junior technician reported brief, intense headaches that coincided with the activation cycles. Most chillingly, Dr. Finch cataloged an incident where a sample, mounted in a testing rig, appeared to emit a faint, internal bioluminescent glow, a soft, blue-white light that pulsed gently for exactly 17 seconds before vanishing. The instruments recorded nothing out of the ordinary. When the test was repeated, it did not happen again. The glow seemed to have been a one-time response, or perhaps a demonstration. This is where unease, a cold drip at the back of the mind, began to seep into the sterile laboratory environment. The material was not a passive substance to be analyzed. It was interactive, seemingly intelligent in a way that defied definition. The team's growing hypothesis, whispered in hushed tones after formal reports were filed, was that the material was not merely a constructed substance, but a kind of engineered quantum substrate, a hardware designed to interface directly with consciousness or with spacetime itself. It wasn't just an advanced piece of a craft, it was the craft's nervous system. The scientists were no longer just taking it apart. They were, in a very real sense, attempting to take its pulse. And in the profound silence of the lab, beneath the hum of shielding and the cool glow of monitors, a terrifying possibility took root. The pulse they were measuring was not an echo of the past, but a signal from the present. The material wasn't dead technology. It was dormant. And their experiments were not just investigation. They were a form of awakening. The moment of understanding did not come in a flash of light, but as a slow, daunting convergence of data points, a puzzle whose final pieces clicked into place during a marathon evening session. It was well past midnight, the desert outside a pool of ink. Inside Lab 3 of the S4 sector, only the hum of the environmental systems and the soft glow of monitor banks broke the silence. Dr. Vance had been running a new set of simulations, modeling how the material's fluctuating density might correlate with local spacetime curvature. Dr. Finch was across the room, meticulously adjusting a laser spectrometer aimed at a newly mounted sample. Dr. Thorne observed both, a logbook in hand, feeling the peculiar, almost electric focus that comes when a solution is hovering just out of reach. The breakthrough was triggered by a decision to sync their experiments. Finch suggested applying a precise, high-frequency mechanical vibration to the sample, a ping based on a harmonic frequency Thorne had isolated weeks prior, while Vance's simulation was set to model the material's theoretical gravitational signature in real time. It was a long-shot attempt to bridge the theoretical with the physical. Finch initiated the sequence. A low, almost subaudible thrum filled the shielded room. On his spectrometer readout, a familiar resonance peak appeared. Nothing new. Then, Vance's screen flickered. His simulation, which modeled a tiny volume of space around the sample, began to show anomalies. The gravitational field was not just fluctuating. It was forming coherent, repeating patterns, geometric waveforms that pulsed in perfect sync with Finch's applied vibration. "Leo, hold the frequency steady," Vance said, his voice tight with concentration. "Aris, are you seeing this on the local gravimeter?" Thorne confirmed, his eyes wide. The standalone sensor, placed a meter from the sample, was echoing the simulation's prediction. The material wasn't just vibrating. It was warping the fabric of reality around it in a controlled, rhythmic fashion. They had moved from observing passive properties to witnessing an active function. Excitement, pure and scientific, crackled between them. This was the first direct evidence of a manipulable gravity field. But then, the phenomena escalated. As they held the frequency, the sample itself began to change. Not in shape, but in appearance. Its surface, normally a dull, graphite gray, developed a subtle, internal luminance, a light that seemed to be trapped beneath its skin, shifting like auroral waves. The air in the lab grew heavy, charged with static that made the hairs on their arms stand up. The readouts across all 3 stations began to feed back data that made no sense. The laser spectrometer registered a sudden, massive spike in reflectivity, then a drop to 0, as if the light was being absorbed entirely. The local gravimeter's readings became chaotic, then settled into a new, stable pattern that matched nothing in its programming. In the midst of this, Thorne noticed something that chilled the excitement in his veins. The patterns forming on Vance's simulation screen, the geometric gravity waves, were no longer just repeating. They were evolving. A simple sine wave morphed into a more complex interference pattern, as if in response to their sustained observation. It was learning, or at least adapting to the stimulus. The 3 men stood in a silent triangle around the now gentle growling sample, the data screaming from their monitors. The shared, unspoken realization settled over them, extinguishing their exhilaration and replacing it with a profound, humbling awe. That was the moment they understood. They weren't just studying a piece of inert, if exotic, technology. They had achieved a resonance, opened a channel. They were, in some fundamental and terrifying way, communicating with it. The electrifying clarity of the breakthrough lasted only until sunrise. By the time the 3 scientists returned to the S4 facility the next morning, the atmosphere had undergone a subtle but profound shift. The familiar, routine presence of base security had intensified. Where once a single Air Force police officer might patrol the corridor outside the theoretical wing, now there were 2, and their posture was less casual, more vigilant. Their eyes, previously glossed with boredom, now tracked movement with a new, analytical focus. It was a change felt more than seen, a tightening of the air, a quiet escalation of the perimeter that had always surrounded their work, drawing it closer, more personal. The first tangible sign came in the form of an unscheduled inventory. A two-man team from the facility security office arrived at Lab 3, their manner polite but unyielding. They carried digital scanners and locked transfer cases. They requested, though the word carried the weight of an order, all physical lab notebooks, personal observation logs, and even the rough scratch pads from the previous night's session. Dr. Finch protested, citing the need for continuous data reference. The senior security officer, a man with a face as expressive as granite, replied with a rehearsed line about protocol updates for Tier 1 material custodianship. The notebooks were logged, sealed in static-free bags, and taken away. They were told copies would be provided. The copies, when they arrived hours later on a secure terminal, were heavily redacted, their own most critical annotations and speculations blacked out into meaningless voids. The warnings began to filter down through new, indirect channels. Their usual Pentagon liaison, a career civil servant who had always been their advocate for resources, was suddenly unavailable. In his place, briefings were conducted by a man introduced only as Mr. Ellis, from an unspecified oversight committee. Ellis spoke in a soft, deliberate monotone. He commended their progress, but framed it within a new context of extreme national sensitivity. Phrases like existential security risk and non-proliferation at any cost entered the lexicon of their meetings. Your work is of unparalleled importance, Ellis told them in a windowless conference room, his hands steepled on the table. Its containment is now the primary objective. Not publication, not peer review. Containment. You must understand the gravity of the box you are opening. Paranoia, once an abstract concept, became a practical consideration. The scientists noticed their private, encrypted communications channel, a secure line reserved for technical discussions between them, experienced strange, momentary drops in fidelity, brief clicks and echoes that hadn't been there before. They took to discussing the most sensitive aspects of their work during walks in the open desert, their words carried away by the wind, trusting it more than their electronically monitored offices. Vance grew withdrawn, jumping at the sound of the lab door's hydraulic hiss. Finch found himself double-checking the calibration of his instruments, suspecting tampering where none existed. Thorne took to locking his personal effects in his car trunk, a small, futile gesture of maintaining a domain that was solely his. The shared euphoria of discovery curdled into a knot of cold anxiety in each of their stomachs. The project's goal had silently pivoted. They were no longer pioneering explorers charting new territory. They had become custodians of a secret so volatile that the very system that had empowered them was now manifestly focused on controlling it, and by extension, controlling them. Their breakthrough wasn't a triumph to be celebrated within the brotherhood of science. It was a breach. A door had been nudged open, and the chilling draft coming through suggested they were not alone on the other side. They began to suspect, with a dawning and terrifying certainty, that they had uncovered something never meant to be found by anyone. The most significant piece of evidence, and perhaps the final act of their professional lives, is a document bearing the classification stamp Beyond Top Secret / Magic, Eyes Only. It is the final consolidated report filed by Drs. Vance, Finch, and Thorne, a summation of their breakthrough findings. The original is stored in a SCF, a sensitive compartmented information facility, somewhere in the Washington, D.C. area. The version that has surfaced in fragments among researchers is a photocopy of a photocopy, its text marred by heavy, black redactions, but its chilling conclusions still bleeding through. The title is innocuous: Interim Analysis of Anomalous Material A, 2327, Gravido Resonant Properties and system interface hypotheses. The opening summary, largely unredacted, is a masterpiece of clinical understatement. It describes successfully inducing a stable, localized spacetime metric alteration using applied harmonic resonance, confirming the material's function as a gravitational field transducer. In plain language, they had proven the sample could create and shape its own gravity field, like a tiny, tunable star. Then come the redactions. Whole paragraphs are obliterated. Section 4.1, titled Observed Reactive Intelligence in Substrate, is a black bar from title to the next header. Only a single, dangling footnote survives, suggesting a non-localized consciousness analog, or a pre-programmed heuristic response of such complexity as to be functionally indistinguishable from intelligence. The implication is staggering. The material wasn't just a tool. It contained, or was connected to, something that could think, or at least learn. The most revealing section is the conclusions and forward recommendations. Here, the scientist's professional tone fractures, revealing a fissure of profound urgency and alarm. One bullet point reads, "The A2327 substrate does not represent a standalone technology, but an active node in a larger, integrated system. Continued resonance experimentation carries the non-negligible risk of not only activating the node further, but of broadcasting its active status." They feared they had not merely analyzed a component, but had pinged a network. Another recommendation is stark. All testing must cease pending the development of a quantum-level containment shield. Current laboratory shielding is insufficient to contain potential field emissions or information leakage. The risk of an uncontrolled cascade effect, while statistically small, presents an existential-level containment failure scenario. They were warning their superiors that they were playing with a force they could not control or even fully measure, a genie they were not sure they could put back in the bottle. The final, unredacted sentence of the report is perhaps the most haunting. It stands alone, a stark conclusion to a world-changing discovery. In the judgment of this team, the A2327 system represents a technological paradigm so advanced that its origins, purpose, and current operational status cannot be determined with any certainty, only inferred as potentially non-terrestrial and still active. Proceed with extreme caution. The document is dated, signed by all three men with their digital certificates, and logged into the secure system. The institutional receipt stamp shows it was received, reviewed, and acknowledged by the Office of Special Projects at the Pentagon. The timeline is precise, cold, and damning. This comprehensive, terrifying report was filed on a Tuesday evening, sent into the labyrinth of classified bureaucracy. By Friday morning, before any official response could be formulated or any new safety protocols enacted, all three men who authored it, Emil Vance, Leo Finch, and Aris Thorne, were gone. When men of such high clearance and immense knowledge vanish into thin air, the most immediate and pragmatic theory points back to the very institution that employed them. This is the government silencing theory. It is not born of wild fantasy, but from a sober observation of history and the dark imperatives of national security. To assess it, we must step into a mindset where information is not just power, but the ultimate strategic asset, an asset that must be protected at all costs, sometimes even from those who helped discover it. Historical precedents, though rarely this absolute, provide a haunting backdrop. The Cold War era is littered with accounts of scientists, engineers, and defectors who found their lives circumscribed, monitored, or abruptly redirected after working on sensitive projects. While outright physical disappearances on U.S. soil are the stuff of extreme legend, the mechanisms for effective silencing are well established and formidable. The apparatus of secrecy possesses tools far beyond simple non-disclosure agreements. There is the power of classification, which can render a person's life's work legally untouchable. There is the threat of prosecution under espionage acts, a sort of Damocles that can keep someone in line for a lifetime. And, in the most extreme scenarios, there is the possibility of a staged, closed-door retirement, a forced transition into a new, anonymous identity far from the world they knew. This leads to a critical fork in the theory: witness protection versus permanent removal. Could Vance, Finch, and Thorne have been placed into an ultra-secure, off-grid version of the witness security program? It is a possibility. Their expertise made them walking security risks. If the conclusions in their final report were deemed too catastrophic for even the highest corridors of power to accept, the state's solution might have been to gently, but permanently, erase them from the board. They would be given new names, new histories, and a stern, lifelong directive to forget their old lives and their cosmic discoveries. Their family's torment would be a tragic, but necessary, collateral damage in the calculus of global stability. The capabilities of agencies like the CIA or the NSA's secretive tailored access operations units make such a scenario chillingly plausible. These entities specialize in creating zero-footprint outcomes, operations that leave no discernible trace. They can fabricate digital trails, orchestrate seemingly mundane events, and manipulate perceptions. Making 3 men vanish from a remote desert community, leaving behind a staged scene of tranquil abandonment, would be a complex operation, but not an impossible one for the architects of the world's most sophisticated intelligence apparatus. Patterns from other enigmatic cases whisper of this possibility. The sudden, often unexplained resignations or early retirements of personnel from classified programs, followed by a lifetime of strict, fearful silence. The families who are left with only vague, unsatisfying explanations from official channels. The sense of a veil being drawn, not by a malevolent force, but by a vast, impersonal system whose primary directive is containment. The disappearance of the 3 scientists fits this pattern, albeit in its most extreme and final form. It presents the ultimate act of containment, not just sealing the information, but sealing away the minds that comprehended it. The theory asks us to consider a profound and unsettling question about the contract between a state and its most brilliant servants. When knowledge becomes too dangerous, when it threatens to destabilize not just nations, but humanity's very understanding of its place in the cosmos, where does protection end and silencing begin? But would a government founded on principles of liberty and transparency really go that far to bury a truth? The silent desert, holding its secrets close, offers no easy answer. If the government silencing theory positions the scientists as tragic victims of their own discovery, the defection hypothesis casts them in a more active, if equally shadowy, role. This theory posits a deliberate choice: that Vance, Finch, and Thorne, confronted with the profound implications of their work and the increasing clampdown from their own superiors, made a calculated decision to take their knowledge elsewhere. This is not a tale of abduction, but of opportunity and profound disillusionment, a classic Cold War narrative updated for a new, more enigmatic battlefield. The foundation of this hypothesis lies in the undeniable, immense value of their expertise. Any nation with aspirations for technological supremacy, or even mere parity, would have identified Project Dreamland's lead researchers as high-value targets. Intelligence agencies from multiple geopolitical rivals maintain dedicated divisions focused on recruiting scientists from Western Black programs. The work on gravido-resonant materials and space-time manipulation would represent the ultimate intelligence prize, a potential quantum leap over competitors. It is plausible that overtures were made, channels of communication opened. Perhaps these began as innocent academic exchanges at international conferences years prior, only to be cultivated over time into something more substantial. The means of defection are as critical as the motive. This would not have been a frantic dash across a border. For men of their stature and knowledge, the process would be meticulously planned and generously financed. A rival nation-state could offer not just asylum, but a new life of unparalleled resources, a state-of-the-art laboratory with unlimited funding, a comfortable, secure existence for their families, and the freedom to pursue their research without the stifling bureaucracy and paranoid oversight of Dreamland. In this light, the disappearance's eerie neatness, the lack of struggle, the abandoned personal effects, suggests not a hasty flight, but a staged exodus. They left behind the trappings of their old identities because they were being provided with superior, new ones. Skeptics point to the extreme difficulty of extracting 3 high-profile individuals from the heart of the Nevada desert security apparatus. Yet, this assumes the defection was a solo escape. A sophisticated exfiltration operation, aided by a foreign intelligence service, could account for the lack of electronic traces. The vehicles found abandoned near the dry lake bed could have been a deliberate misdirection, a waypoint where they transferred to a different mode of transport, perhaps a private aircraft landing on the ancient, flat surface under cover of darkness. Their personal communications being monitored becomes irrelevant if the planning occurred through dead drops, encrypted messages hidden in seemingly innocent data files, or during sanctioned off-site trips. The defection hypothesis reframes the central question. It moves us from asking what was done to them to what did they choose to do. It suggests that the wall of secrecy they faced was not a prison, but a catalyst. Faced with the choice between containing a universe-altering truth for one government or exploring its full potential under the patronage of another, they may have made a ruthless, rational calculation. Their final report's warnings could then be read not as a plea for caution, but as a justification for their impending departure, a document meant to signal the unbearable burden of the knowledge they carried. The mystery thus twists on a single, pivotal uncertainty. Were they silenced, or did they, with cool deliberation, simply choose to disappear? Beyond the terrestrial explanations of statecraft and defection lies a theory that steps fully into the cosmic unknown. This is the extraterrestrial contact theory, a perspective that asks us to consider the possibility that the disappearances were not an action by any human agency, but a direct consequence of the scientists' own work. In this view, Vance, Finch, and Thorne did not just study an alien artifact, they succeeded in attracting the attention of its original owners. Their breakthrough was not just a scientific achievement, but a beacon. This theory draws unsettling parallels with patterns reported in countless abduction cases, albeit on a grander, more consequential scale. The central motif is the targeted removal of individuals connected to the phenomenon. Experiencers often report being taken by non-human intelligences after witnessing UFOs or demonstrating a specific, heightened psychic or intellectual sensitivity. The 3 scientists, by virtue of their deep, focused interaction with the anomalous material, may have become uniquely visible or resonant on a perceptual spectrum far beyond our own. Their intensive work did not just analyze the material. It may have formed a sustained, conscious connection with its source, making them not just observers, but active participants in an interstellar dialogue they only half understood. Crucially, the foundation for this theory is built from the scientists' own final report. Their conclusion that the material was an active node, and their fear of broadcasting its active status reads, in this context, not as a technical warning, but as a prophetic one. If the artifact was a piece of technology, then activating it was analogous to switching on a transponder. Their experiments did not merely measure a gravity field. They may have sent a signal, a ping back to a celestial source, announcing, the node is awake. It has been discovered. Their work became a handshake, and the response to that handshake may have been their removal. Supporting anecdotal evidence from the broader facility adds an eerie texture. In the week leading up to the vanishings, there were scattered, unofficial reports from perimeter security and maintenance personnel of strange, low-hanging lights over the adjacent Tikaboo Valley. These were not dismissed as aircraft or satellites. They were described as silent, colored orbs that moved with an intelligent, inquisitive motion before winking out. More compelling are the hushed accounts of a minor, unexplained power fluctuation in the S4 sector on the night of the breakthrough, accompanied by what one technician logged as a temporary chronometric anomaly in a secondary system clock, a phrase that, in less guarded language, translates to missing time. These small, disparate events form a constellation of oddities that orbit the central mystery. The theory provides a chillingly elegant answer to the completeness of the disappearance. Human agencies leave traces, a financial trail, a forged document, a witness coerced. But an intelligence capable of engineering spacetime itself could perform an extraction with surgical precision. It could pluck 3 individuals from their vehicles mid-journey, leaving no physical evidence of a struggle because there was none, perhaps only a moment of disorientation, a brilliant light, and then a transition. Their personal belongings were left behind because they were irrelevant to their new destination. Their lives, their identities, their human concerns were simply transcended. This perspective forces a profound shift in the narrative scale. It suggests that the true story of Project Dreamland was not about human beings trying to understand a technology. It was about a technology and the consciousness behind it, finally making contact with the human minds capable of perceiving it. The government's secrecy and security concerns were not the cause of the climax, but a reaction to a phenomenon they could not control, a desperate attempt to manage the unmanageable. In the end, the most haunting possibility is that all the human intrigue, the surveillance, the warnings, the theories of defection or assassination, was merely background noise. The real story was happening on a different frequency altogether. Perhaps Emil Vance, Leo Finch, and Aris Thorne did not simply disappear into the desert sands or a government safe house. Perhaps, having unlocked a door between worlds, they were, quite literally, taken. Amidst the conspiracies and cosmic possibilities, there exists a more grounded, human theory rooted not in external forces, but in the internal landscape of the mind. This is the psychological break theory. It asks us to consider the immense, often unacknowledged, pressures of working within a world of absolute secrecy on problems that defy known reality. Before we imagine government agents or alien intelligences, we must first consider the fragility of the human psyche under extreme and sustained duress. The environment at a facility like S4 is a perfect crucible for psychological strain. It is a world of profound isolation, both physical and intellectual. The scientists were severed from the academic community, unable to discuss their work with peers, seek validation, or share their burdens. Every conversation was monitored, every hypothesis classified. The work itself was of a staggering magnitude, confronting them daily with physical impossibilities that challenged their deepest understanding of the universe. This combination of intellectual vertigo and social confinement can erode even the most resilient mind. Paranoia, in such a setting, is not a disorder. It is a logical response to a reality where secrecy is paramount and trust is a vulnerability. History offers precedents of brilliant minds buckling under the weight of world-altering knowledge or extreme pressure. While not common, there are documented cases of scientists and engineers in classified programs experiencing acute stress-induced psychoses, severe depressive episodes, or dissociative breaks. The content of their work, often involving existential threats during the Cold War, created cognitive dissonance so severe that the mind sought escape. The mind, when faced with an unbearable reality, can sometimes choose to construct a new one. In this theory, the disappearances could be interpreted as a form of voluntary, but psychosis-driven, escape. Each man, grappling privately with the same overwhelming stress and the terrifying implications of their discovery, could have reached a breaking point. They might have come to believe, genuinely and fearfully, that they were in imminent danger from their own government or from the phenomenon they studied. In a shared, delusional state, potentially fueled by subconscious communication or a collective decision born of despair, they might have staged their own vanishing. They abandoned their old identities, seeing them as compromised or doomed, and fled into the vast anonymity of the American West, their brilliant minds now dedicated solely to the primal urge to survive. This explanation humanizes the mystery, replacing shadows with sorrow. It suggests a tragedy of mental health, of a system that demanded superhuman fortitude without providing the necessary psychological support. It turns the story inward, making it about the limits of human endurance. Yet, for all its rational compassion, the theory stumbles on a critical point: synchronicity. For such a breakdown to result in a coordinated, flawless disappearance, it would require all three men, individuals with distinct personalities and coping mechanisms, to succumb to a similar psychotic break at the exact same time and to execute a complex plan while in that state. The stress was shared, but the mind breaks in unique ways. But all three at once, with such clean and unified results? The odds, to even the most compassionate skeptic, seemed astronomically impossible. The most exotic theory, one that resides at the bleeding edge of theoretical physics and science fiction, proposes that the scientist's fate was not an act of malice, choice, or abduction, but a catastrophic and unintended consequence of their own success. This is the interdimensional accident theory. It suggests that Vance, Finch, and Thorne did not merely study a technology that manipulated gravity, but one that acted as a key to dimensions beyond our own. In this scenario, their final experiment didn't just send a signal, it opened a door, and they fell through. The foundation for this lies in the core of Dr. Vance's theoretical work. His models of the material's function increasingly pointed toward concepts in string theory and M-theory, which propose the existence of additional, compactified dimensions beyond the familiar four of spacetime. The material's ability to create localized gravity wells, he theorized, might be a side effect of a far greater capability, briefly thinning or puncturing the membrane between our dimension and adjacent ones. Their goal was to understand and control this effect at a microscopic level. The interdimensional accident theory posits that on that final day, they succeeded far beyond their wildest dreams or nightmares. The possibility, while fantastical, is rooted in legitimate, if highly speculative, physics. If spacetime is a fabric, it can be warped, as with gravity, but it might also be folded or even torn. A technology capable of generating an intense, perfectly tuned gravitational resonance could, in theory, create a kink or a temporary bridge, a wormhole not across vast interstellar distances, but across dimensional boundaries. Their laboratory, in essence, could have become the epicenter of a controlled, but ultimately unstable, dimensional puncture. The scant technical data from that day, gleaned from peripheral systems not part of the main experiment, hints at such a calamity. Maintenance logs show unexplained power drains in the S4 sector's magnetic containment shielding at the precise time of their final test. More intriguing are the fragmentary witness accounts from personnel in adjacent sectors. One electrician, working in a tunnel half a mile away, reported a sudden, profound sensation of vertigo and of visual distortion, like looking at the world through warped glass, that lasted for several seconds before vanishing. Another spoke of all the compasses in a storage locker simultaneously spinning freely before settling. These were not lights in the sky, but anomalies in the very geometry of local reality. In this theory, the disappearance is both absolute and strangely passive. It was not a removal, but a translation. At the moment of peak resonance, the boundary between realities in that lab may have become fluid. The scientists, and perhaps the very space they occupied, could have been shunted sideways into a parallel dimension or fragmented across multiple probabilistic timelines. Their vehicles, traveling through the desert, might have passed through a lingering, unseen ripple of this event, a bubble of distorted space-time that simply unmade their connection to our universe. This leads to the theory's most haunting and poetic implication. It redefines the concept of disappearance. They did not go to a place, hidden on a map or in the stars. Instead, they slipped between the cracks of existence itself. They became unmoored from our continuum. Their physical forms, their consciousness, might still exist, but in a phase of reality we cannot perceive or access, like a radio signal broadcast on a frequency for which we have no receiver. The mystery of their fate becomes a question of topology, not geography. It asks us to expand our understanding of what exists means. What if Emil Vance, Leo Finch, and Aris Thorne didn't go anywhere in this world? What if, in a fleeting moment of transcendent breakthrough, they accidentally stepped off the map of our reality entirely and went, in some sense, everywhere and nowhere at once? The desert night holds many secrets, but sometimes it leaves a witness. For decades, a man named Carl Henderson carried one such secret. He worked as a contract security guard at the perimeter of the Groom Lake facility in the early 1990s, a job that consisted mostly of long, silent hours and a profound respect for the boundaries he was paid to patrol. He signed lifetime non-disclosure agreements. He kept his silence until age and a desire, as he puts it, to put a true thing into the world before I go, led him to agree to a single, anonymous interview, his voice digitally altered, his face in shadow. My route was the outer vehicle track, north of the main gate, Carl recounts, his voice a low, gravelly whisper. It was a clear night, cold. The stars were out so thick it looked like someone had thrown salt across black velvet. The only sound was my own engine, the crunch of gravel under the tires. Routine. Always routine. He describes the facility as a collection of darkened shapes against the mountain. Only a few administrative windows glowing with low, green-hued light. His job was to look for anomalies, anything that didn't belong in the immense, sleeping stillness. It was around 0200, maybe 0230, he continues. I was on the ridge overlooking the S4 access road. That's when I saw the light. He emphasizes it was not a searchlight or vehicle headlight. It was a soft, blue-white glow coming from the direction of the S4 sector. It didn't flood the area. It seemed contained, like it was shining up from a pit or a low window. It pulsed, gently, 3 times, slow. Then it just faded out. He reported it on his radio, as per protocol. The response from the command post was immediate and terse. Acknowledged. Continue your patrol. No deviation. The tone, he says, told him they already knew. But it was the sound that followed that truly unnerved him. About 10 minutes after the light faded, the silence came back. But it was a different kind of silence. The desert has a baseline hum. Insects, the wind, distant generators. This was an absolute quiet, like someone had put a glass jar over the whole valley. I stopped the truck, rolled down my window. Nothing. Not a cricket. Not a breeze. It was the most unnatural thing I've ever experienced. It lasted maybe a full minute. Then, the normal sounds just rushed back in, like a wave. His shift ended at 0600. As he was driving out past the main gate at dawn, he saw something unusual. The big blast door to the S4 pedestrian entrance was standing wide open. Not just unsealed, but propped open. I'd never seen that before, not at that hour. There was a small cluster of people in civilian clothes, suits, not lab coats, standing just inside, talking. They weren't moving with urgency. They were just standing there, looking. One of them was writing on a clipboard. He was waved through without his usual vehicle check, another break in routine that felt profoundly wrong. Carl Henderson drove home that morning, slept fitfully, and returned for his next shift. He asked no questions. He learned the unofficial code. You see, you report, you forget. But he never forgot the pulsed blue light, the vacuum of sound, and the sight of that open door, a maw into the mountain that seemed, in the dawn light, less like an entrance and more like an exit. For 30 years, he held the story inside, a quiet weight. He's never spoken publicly about that night, or about the unsettling emptiness that seemed to radiate from the for sector in the days that followed, until now. The official reports are sterile documents. The truth, in its rawest, most painful form, lives in the hearts of those left behind. In a series of private interviews conducted over the years, the families of Vance, Finch, and Thorne have shared fragments of memory, painting a portrait not just of loss, but of a slow, gathering shadow that preceded the final silence. Their accounts are not of spies or defectors, but of husbands and fathers who began to change. Elena Finch remembers the last month with a clarity etched by grief. Leo was always intense about his work, but it was a focused intensity. This was different. He became distant, not uncaring, but removed. He'd be sitting with us at dinner, and his eyes would go somewhere else. He started taking long, solitary walks in the desert behind our house after dark. When I'd ask what was on his mind, he'd just squeeze my hand and say, "Just the weight of the puzzle, honey." But his hand was cold. She recalls the last night, how he lingered at their son's bedroom door, watching him sleep for a long time. He kissed his forehead, which he hadn't done since the boys were little. It felt like a goodbye. Dr. Vance's daughter, Clara, now an astronomer, speaks of her father's final phone call. It was 2 days before. He was calling from a secure line, his voice tinny. We were talking about my graduate work, about pulsars. Then he got very quiet and said something that made no sense to me then. He said, "Clara, no matter what you ever hear, remember that the universe is not just stranger than we imagine. It's kinder, too." I have to believe that. I asked him what he meant. He just repeated, "Remember that," and the line went dead. She pauses, her voice softening. He was trying to give me an answer to a question I didn't know how to ask yet. For Miriam Thorne, Aris's sister who became his closest confidant after his wife passed, the signs were in his cryptic solitude. He stopped his woodworking, she says. That was his therapy. His workshop just sat, gathering dust. The last time I visited, I found him sitting at the kitchen table, not reading, not writing, just staring at the wall. He said, "Miriam, have you ever felt like you've touched something so beautiful and so terrible that it redefines every beautiful and terrible thing that came before?" I told him he was scaring me. He just nodded and said, "Good. You should be." He wasn't being dramatic. He was warning me. The items left behind are the most haunting relics. Not the wallets or keys, but the intimate anchors of a life. Leo Finch's favorite Swiss Army knife, a gift from his father, sat on his bedside table. Emil Vance's cherished first edition of Einstein's essays on relativity remained on his desk, a bookmark holding his place. Aris Thorne's half-finished walnut bowl, sanded to a silken smoothness, sat on the lathe in his silent workshop. These were not things a man planning a new life would abandon. They were the foundations of a self. A common thread weaves through each family's testimony, a detail more chilling than any tale of strange lights. It transcends the individual quirks of worry or stress. In separate conversations, years apart, Elena Finch, Clara Vance, and Miriam Thorne each voiced the same core observation, their words echoing one another with an awful harmony. They all said their husbands, in those final weeks, seemed haunted not just by pressure, but by a specific, dawning dread. They described a new vigilance, a hesitation before speaking, a habit of checking the rearview mirror during mundane drives. The precise source of the fear was never named, but its presence was a cold, new fact in their homes. They didn't speak of being watched by their bosses, but of being watched by something their work had unveiled. As Miriam concluded, her voice barely a whisper, Aris wasn't afraid of being fired. He was afraid of being found. In a world of top-secret clearances and compartmentalized genius, there exists a class of witness often rendered invisible, the cleaning staff. Their security clearance is minimal, but their access after hours is profound. One such man, who we will call Miguel, worked the night shift at the S4 administrative wing. His testimony, given quietly years later, adds a layer of granular, physical detail the official records lack. He saw the infrastructure of the mystery. We worked when the brains went home, Miguel explains. Empty offices, empty halls. My job was to empty trash, vacuum, wipe down surfaces. You notice patterns. He recalls the patterns of the three scientists specifically. Dr. Vance's office trash was always full of crumpled graph paper, the equations growing denser and more frantic-looking in the final weeks. Dr. Finch's bin held snapped pencil leads and frayed, twisted paper clips, the detritus of intense, physical concentration. Dr. Thorne's was often neat, save for used tissues. The man seemed to have developed persistent allergies, or perhaps was suffering from stress-induced sinus issues. It was the overheard fragments, caught as he worked near a slightly ajar conference room door one evening, that stuck with him. I wasn't eavesdropping, he insists. But voices carry in empty halls. He heard Dr. Finch's voice, strained, can't just contain an idea, Emil. It's not a gas leak. Dr. Vance, sounding weary. We have to make them understand the observer effect is bidirectional. We're not just looking. And lastly, Dr. Thorne, calm but final. The report will be our testament. Nothing more we can do. Then, the sound of chairs scraping back. Miguel quickly moved away, but the tension in those clipped sentences lingered in the air like a scent. The most tangible evidence he witnessed was in the shared recycling bin for the high-security labs, which was incinerated daily. In the days before the disappearance, he noticed a change. Normally, it contained printouts, used gloves, packaging. But then, he began to find what he called the burned paper. Not ash, but sheets of high-quality bond paper that had been meticulously charred around the edges, the centers blank or containing only a few legible, typed words surrounded by blackened voids. Someone was using a controlled burn, likely a lab Bunsen burner, to destroy documents by hand, bypassing the secure shredders. It was an act of personal, urgent secrecy. On the morning after the scientists vanished, Miguel was cleaning the hallway outside Lab 3. The door was sealed with a new, temporary security tape. But by the threshold, unnoticed by the suits who had come and gone, he saw three small, clear droplets on the polished linoleum floor. They had congealed, not like water, but like silicone sealant, with a faint, iridescent sheen. He didn't touch them. He simply mopped over them, watching them smear into a faint, rainbow slick before disappearing. He never reported it. Who would he tell? He was just the janitor. But his story underscores a profound truth of such mysteries. Sometimes, the most important witnesses are the ones nobody thinks to ask, the ones who see the reality of a place not in its grand designs, but in its discarded trash and its stains on the floor. Within the insular world of Dreamland, other scientists, bound by the same oaths of secrecy, worked in parallel compartments. A handful, their careers long since concluded, have consented to speak in broad terms, their identities shielded. Their perspective is uniquely valuable. They were peers, able to recognize professional brilliance and professional unraveling in equal measure. They observed Vance, Finch, and Thorne not as family or security, but as colleagues on the same treacherous frontier. Dr. Eleanor Shaw, a computational physicist, worked on data analysis for the project. Emil Vance was the most brilliant intuitive thinker I've ever met, she recalls. His mind made leaps the rest of us had to bridge with months of calculation. But in the final weeks, that spark dimmed. He became excessively methodical, almost plodding in meetings, as if he was double-checking every thought before letting it leave his mouth. It wasn't a loss of intelligence. It was the behavior of a man who believed his thoughts were being audited in real time. Another colleague, an aerodynamics specialist named Mark, observed Leo Finch. Leo was a rock, pragmatic to his core. If he was worried about a material stress or a systems integration, he'd say so bluntly. The change was that he stopped talking about the engineering problems. The last time I saw him in the cafeteria, he looked exhausted. I made a joke about torque ratios. He just stared at me and said, "We're so far past torque, Mark." Then he looked almost embarrassed, got up, and left. He wasn't solving machinery anymore. He was grappling with principles. Regarding project details they can legally discuss, their language is carefully generic, yet telling. They speak of novel materials exhibiting non-local quantum effects and propulsion concepts involving fundamental field manipulation. They confirm the project's atmosphere was one of unprecedented challenge. It was the difference between climbing a mountain and being asked to climb a ladder that disappears into the clouds, Shaw says. You couldn't see the top. You could only hope the next rung would hold. The most striking consensus among these fellow scientists concerns not the men themselves, but the environment they left behind. In the days and weeks following the disappearance, a palpable shift permeated the S4 sector. The silence was different, Mark states. Before, it was the silence of concentration. Afterward, it was the silence of apprehension. Security briefings became more frequent and less informative. The free flow of non-classified, theoretical discussion that once sparked in hallways ceased entirely. Colleagues avoided eye contact. New personnel, described as systems auditors and protocol compliance officers, appeared. They did not engage with the science, but with the scientists' habits, reviewing lab access logs, inspecting data storage procedures, conducting impromptu interviews about information hygiene. The message was clear. The primary mission was no longer breakthrough. It was containment. The spark of open inquiry that Vance, Finch, and Thorne had embodied, however troubled, was extinguished. The facility's purpose seemed to contract from exploration to fortification. These fellow travelers, bound by oath and a shared understanding of the stakes, offer no wild theories. They speak of a professional and psychological climate. They confirm the towering intellect of the missing men, attest to the radical nature of the work, and describe the chilling organizational aftermath. When asked for their personal conclusion, they demur, citing lack of evidence. But their observations paint a vivid before and after picture. They all agreed, in separate conversations, on one thing. A fundamental vibration within the facility changed after the trio vanished. The air grew heavier, the rules stricter, the future of the work darker and more constrained. Something had not just been lost. Something had been sealed away, and the vacuum it left behind was filled with a new, pervasive fear. The most cryptic testimony comes not from a named source, but from a void. Several years into the investigation, a communication arrived through a highly encrypted, ephemeral channel used by investigative journalists. The sender used a sophisticated voice scrambler and a one-time digital signature associated with legacy Pentagon communication systems. They identified themselves only as archivist, a person claiming to have been part of the administrative and records management team attached to Project Dreamland. They agreed to a single, text-based Q&A, under the condition that their words be published unaltered, stating, "The truth is in the sequence." The archivist's claims were explosive and unverifiable. They stated that the final report by Vance, Finch, and Thorne was not the end of their output. That in the 72 hours between filing it and their disappearance, the trio produced a second, far more disturbing document. A white paper, as the source called it. This document allegedly contained not data, but a philosophical and strategic conclusion that the technology they were reverse engineering was not merely a tool, but a consciousness-guided architecture. that it required, or perhaps was, a form of non-human intelligence to operate fully. The scientists, the archivist claimed, concluded they were not building a new propulsion system, but attempting to wake up a sleeping god. When asked what happened to the men, the archivist's text response was chillingly precise. They were not terminated. They were not defected. They were transferred. The project was reclassified beyond MJ-12 oversight. It moved from the Air Force to a new, interagency cell with no paper trail. The scientists were its first subjects. The source claimed the vehicles found were a stagecraft, a deliberate distraction, and that the men were taken to a subsurface facility, location unknown, for what was termed continuation research, a euphemism, they suggested, for studying the human mind's interaction with the anomalous material directly. The risks the archivist claimed to be taking were mortal. By initiating this contact, I have triggered tripwires. My lifespan is now measured in conversations. They will burn the records and the record keepers. This pervasive paranoia saturated every message. They refused to provide any verifiable proof, such as document copies or verifiable names, stating, "Proof is a trap. It is a fingerprint. I give you the shape of the emptiness instead. Look at what is missing, and you will see the truth." Then, as abruptly as it began, the communication ceased. The secure channel was digitally scrubbed from the server, leaving no trace of the original connection. Follow-up attempts yielded nothing but error messages. Colleagues attempting to verify any aspect of the archivist's claims, the existence of a white paper, the new interagency cell, hit the same impenetrable wall of classification. No other source has ever corroborated these specific details. The archivist vanished into the same silence they purported to describe. This source, who claimed to hold the key to the mystery, disappeared completely and permanently shortly after our final, inconclusive exchange. Their testimony remains the most controversial piece of the puzzle, a map that leads to a blank spot on the wall, drawn by a ghost. In the absence of official answers, researchers and journalists have long turned to the legal machinery of transparency, the Freedom of Information Act. This federal law allows for the request of government documents, a process that is often a marathon of bureaucracy, delay, and strategic obstruction. For decades, FOIA requests pertaining to Area 51, 4, and the missing scientists were uniformly denied under sweeping national security exemptions. The facility itself was a black hole for such requests. However, a persistent focus on the personnel involved, targeting the Air Force's civilian employment records and base access logs, rather than the projects themselves, eventually yielded results. After years of appeals, a small cache of documents was released. They are masterclasses in obfuscation. The documents themselves are physically underwhelming. Photocopies of photocopies, their paper bearing the faint, smudged marks of old dot matrix printers. They consist primarily of civilian employment verification forms, security badge authorization records, and mundane administrative memoranda regarding laboratory equipment procurement. Names are often redacted, replaced with designations like Subject A, Researcher 2, or simply a long, black bar. Project names are almost entirely excised. Yet, within this forest of black ink, a stark, skeletal timeline of the vanishing can be pieced together. The first crucial document is a personnel status change notice from the Office of Special Projects. The subject's name is redacted, but the employee ID number, when cross-referenced with other partially released payroll documents, matches Dr. Aris Thorne. The form is a model of sterile language. Under Reason for Change, it states, "Voluntary resignation, all access terminated." The effective date and time are stamped. 1,700 hours on the very Friday the men disappeared. The chilling detail is in the authorization section. The approving official's signature block is redacted, but the title isn't. Director, Special Compartmented Studies. This was not a base commander or a project manager. This was a high-level Pentagon office, indicating the termination was handled far from the Nevada desert. The second key set of documents involves facility access logs for the S-4 sector, released in heavily censored fragments. They show the entry and exit of badge numbers linked to the scientists for the weeks leading up to the event. The pattern is consistent until the final day. The logs for that day show their entry in the morning, but their exit column is not filled with a timestamp. Instead, a redacted note has been appended, reading simply, "Egress via Protocol Alpha." The term Protocol Alpha does not appear in any other released military or security manual. It is a ghost procedure. The true narrative, however, is not in the sparse text that remains, but in the shape and strategy of the redactions themselves. FOIA experts employ a technique called redaction analysis. They study the length of the black bars, the alignment of text, and the document structure to infer what has been removed. In these files, the redactions are aggressive and telltale. Long, paragraph-sized blocks are removed from what should be simple forms, suggesting entire blocks of explanation or unusual circumstances were recorded and then deemed unfit for release. On one equipment request form signed by Leo Finch for high-density magnetic field coils, the entire justification section is blacked out. The requested delivery date was the Monday after he vanished. The work was to continue. Furthermore, the released pages are numbered out of sequence, e.g., page 2 of 7, page 5 of 7, indicating entire intervening pages were withheld. The story the government tells through release is one of mundane administrative closure. But the shape of what is missing, the gaps, the ghost protocols, the high-level authorization for a sudden resignation processed with impossible speed, screams of crisis management. The paperwork creates an official story of quiet resignation. But it's what's blacked out, the negative space of classified ink, that whispers the real story of a frantic, top-down effort to contain a catastrophic and unexplained event. While the human witnesses vanished, the machines they left behind had stories to tell. Through subsequent, heavily sanitized facility audits and the accounts of technicians who entered Lab 3 after the event, a picture of the final moments emerges, not from words, but from the silent testimony of instrumentation. This forensic analysis of the laboratory environment forms a critical, if incomplete, evidence chain. The first notable detail was the state of the equipment. It was not shut down. Several key instruments were found in a low-power standby mode. Their last active sessions terminated improperly, as if a main power bus had been briefly interrupted and restored. A high-precision laser spectrometer, Dr. Thorne's primary tool, had been running a continuous harmonic resonance scan. Its internal buffer held data for a scan that initiated but never completed. The final recorded frequency was 1.601 GHz, a frequency with no standard industrial or scientific use, but one that matched a harmonic peak Thorne had noted as highly reactive in his earlier, unredacted notes. More telling were the residual signatures captured by passive monitoring systems. Every high-security lab at S4 was equipped with ambient radiation and electromagnetic field, EMF, sensors, primarily for safety. The logs from these sensors, fragments of which were included in an environmental safety review obtained via FOIA, show a massive, short-lived spike. At 16:18 local time, correlating with the scientists' last keycard activity, the ambient EMF monitor in Lab 3 registered a field strength over 500 times baseline, focused in the ultra-low frequency, ULF, range. This spike lasted for 1.7 seconds before the sensor overloaded and shut down. Simultaneously, a neutron radiation detector in the adjacent corridor logged a brief but significant increase in thermal neutron flux, a type of radiation not associated with any standard lab equipment. It was a signature more consistent with a microscopic, contained nuclear event or an exotic particle interaction. Independent physicists and engineers who have reviewed the scant available data point to the confluence of these readings as highly anomalous. The specific ULF frequency, while unusual, could theoretically be generated by high-power equipment. The thermal neutron flux is more perplexing. Together, they suggest an event involving significant atomic-level disruption within a highly localized field. One consulting physicist, speaking on background, theorized it could be consistent with a transient manipulation of the weak nuclear force within a constrained area, a description that aligns eerily with the team's work on gravitational field transduction. In simpler terms, for a fraction of a second, the very rules binding matter together in that lab may have been altered. The final piece of equipment data is perhaps the most haunting. A standard laboratory uninterruptible power supply, UPS, which provided clean power to the main data acquisition computer, recorded a log entry. At the precise moment of the EMF and radiation spikes, the UPS logged an input frequency anomaly and switched to battery backup for a duration of 4.3 seconds, despite no loss of wall power. This indicates the local electrical grid itself was distorted, its 60 Hz sine wave warped by an overwhelming, localized energy event that backfed into the facility's wiring. The narrative compiled from these silent witnesses is not one of a planned departure or a quiet resignation. The equipment tells a story of an abrupt, violent, and profoundly energetic event. It suggests the laboratory was the epicenter of a physics experiment that culminated not in a data point, but in an uncontrolled, possibly dimensional, rupture. The instruments captured the final, frantic milliseconds of a boundary being crossed, not by choice, but by catastrophic scientific success. The equipment didn't just record data, it recorded a door slamming shut, with the researchers on the other side. Beyond the laboratory equipment lies a more intimate layer of evidence, the personal artifacts. These are the objects that define the men outside their work, the anchors to their ordinary lives. Their silent presence in the abandoned homes and workspaces speaks volumes, for in a planned departure, whether defection, escape, or a new life in hiding, these are the things one takes. Here, they were left with a chilling uniformity, creating a psychological crime scene of profound ambiguity. In their lockers at the S4 facility, the items were mundane, yet telling. Dr. Vance's locker contained a spare pair of reading glasses, a half-eaten bag of almonds, and a postcard from the Princeton University bookstore, a memento of his old life. Dr. Finch's held a clean, folded jumpsuit, a tube of industrial hand cleaner, and a worn paperback on advanced thermodynamics. Dr. Thorne's was nearly empty, save for a single, finely crafted wooden pen, a product of his hobby. Nothing was disturbed. It was as if they had simply stepped out for a coffee break, expecting to return. The contents of their home offices and studies were more revealing. Emil Vance's desk held his most prized book, that first edition of Einstein's essays. A framed photograph of his daughter, Clara, at her high school graduation sat beside it. Leo Finch's workshop, adjacent to his garage, contained not only the half-finished walnut bowl, but the complete, lovingly organized set of chisels and gouges he used to create such pieces. On his dresser, the Swiss Army knife gifted by his father sat in its usual spot. Aris Thorne's bedroom contained a simple, polished stone paperweight on his nightstand, a souvenir from a long-ago trip to the Maine coast with his late wife. These were not just objects. They were touchstones of identity, memory, and love. The most potent evidence, however, was found in plain sight, and its absence was a scream. In the initial police reports filed by the Lincoln County Sheriff's Office, reports conducted before federal intervention, deputies noted the presence of certain personal items in each home. On the bathroom counter in the Finch residence, Leo's wedding band rested in a small ceramic dish next to the sink, where he always removed it before working on his car. In the master bedroom of the Vance home, Emil's own ring was found on his dresser. No such ring is mentioned in the Thorne report, but his sister later confirmed he always wore his on a chain around his neck. The chain was found, unclasped, on his bedroom floor. These are not items a man plans to live without. A defector might abandon family photos to sever emotional ties, but a wedding ring is a universally recognized symbol of identity and connection, often used as a last resort financial asset. A man entering witness protection would be instructed to take it. A man fleeing for his life might pawn it. To leave it behind so casually, in its habitual place, suggests either an overwhelming belief in an imminent return or a moment of departure so abrupt and absolute that the very concept of personal identity, of being a husband, a father, a man with a past, was instantly and irrevocably rendered irrelevant. The abandoned rings ask the most haunting question of all, one that echoes through the empty houses. Why would they leave behind the one object that most tangibly bound them to the world they knew? In any investigation into a disappearance, the financial footprint is often the most telling. Money leaves a trail of intention, of planning, of panic, or of normalcy violently interrupted. A meticulous examination of the available financial records of Vance, Finch, and Thorne, pieced together from court documents, family testimony, and limited bank statements, reveals a pattern that is deeply unsettling in its very ordinariness, right up until it abruptly ceases. In the months leading up to the event, there were no signs of preparation for a life on the run. Bank accounts showed routine activity, mortgage or rent payments, utility bills, grocery store purchases, occasional cash withdrawals of modest sums. There were no large, unexplained cash withdrawals that would suggest the purchase of untraceable assets or travel. Credit card statements showed no purchases of airline tickets, luggage, or survival gear. Dr. Finch did make a substantial purchase 6 weeks prior. A new set of performance tires for his Corvette, an indulgence consistent with his love for the car, not an escape vehicle being readied for a desert chase. Dr. Vance's most notable transaction was a charitable donation to his alma mater. Dr. Thorne's showed a payment to a specialty wood supplier. These were the financial rhythms of settled, predictable lives. The families confirmed that standard life insurance policies were in place through their government employment, but there was no unusual activity, no increases in coverage, no changes in beneficiaries. No evidence of secret offshore accounts or hidden assets has ever surfaced, despite intense scrutiny by private investigators hired by the families. If such vehicles existed, they were constructed with a sophistication that has left no digital or paper fingerprint in any jurisdiction investigators have been able to access. The pivotal detail lies in the timing of the financial freeze. 1 week before the physical disappearance, the electronic heartbeat of their financial lives flatlined. No debit card was swiped. No online bill payment was initiated. No ATM withdrawals were made. Their direct deposit paychecks from the Friday before the event cleared into their accounts, but the money simply sat there, untouched. This cessation was total and simultaneous across all 3 men. It was as if, 1 week prior to vanishing from the physical world, they had already begun to withdraw from the economic one. This 1-week gap is the financial mystery's core. It suggests a conscious decision, made in unison, to cease all normal consumption. It could indicate a period of intense, focused preparation for something they knew was coming, a preparation that required no store-bought equipment, implying they had access to everything they needed through their work. Alternatively, it could point to a state of profound psychological detachment, where the concerns of daily life, including money, became irrelevant. Either way, the clean break indicates a clear boundary between their old lives and the event itself. The final transactions on their accounts are telling in their mundane nature. For Finch, it was a tank of gas at a station near Rachel. For Thorne, a car wash. For Vance, a cup of coffee at the on-site cafeteria. Then, nothing. The paper trail of their existences, a chronicle of small choices and daily needs, went completely and irrevocably cold exactly 1 week before they walked out of their lives. The money remained, a ghostly testament to lives interrupted not by financial necessity or greed, but by something that rendered money, and all the world it connects to, profoundly, utterly meaningless. In a mystery defined by absence, images offer a tantalizing promise of presence. Yet the visual record surrounding the disappearance is a paradox, simultaneously extensive and void, providing a framework of normalcy punctured by fleeting, uncanny details. The evidence exists in layers: official surveillance, orbital observation, and personal snapshots, each with its own story. The most scrutinized materials are the perimeter security camera frames released under duress to the family's legal counsel. The footage from the outer gate, showing each scientist departing in their vehicle, is grainy and unremarkable. The cars are visible, their headlights cutting through the twilight. But enhanced analysis of the footage reveals subtle anomalies. In the sequence showing Dr. Thorne's sedan exiting, a digital timestamp in the corner flickers and skips for 3 frames, jumping from 16 hours 58 minutes and 1 second to 16 hours 58 minutes and 5 seconds, then back. A 4-second gap. The vehicle's position is consistent before and after, but those 4 seconds are missing data. The official explanation was data packet loss. Satellite imagery of the Groom Lake area from that week, commercially purchased from archival services, shows the expected, timeless desert landscape. However, one image, taken by a European weather satellite at 5:16 Greenwich Mean Time on the morning after the disappearance, 5:16 p.m. local time, the exact moment the cell phones went dead, shows a curious atmospheric phenomenon. Over the Tikaboo Valley, directly along the presumed route of the vehicles, there is a small, perfect circle of absolutely clear air amidst high-altitude cirrus clouds. It is a clean hole in the cloud layer, about a mile in diameter. Meteorologists consulted deemed it unusual, but not impossible. It remains a stark, geometric coincidence on the map. The most poignant visual records are the personal ones. A photograph recovered from Leo Finch's home computer, taken by his son at a barbecue 2 weekends prior, shows the 3 scientists together. Vance, Finch, and Thorne stand by the grill, holding plates. They are smiling, but the image, when enlarged, reveals a haunting detail. Their body language is closed off. None are looking at each other. Their eyes seem distant, focused on something beyond the frame. It is a portrait of togetherness without connection. But the single most perplexing piece of visual evidence comes from an unexpected source: the automated security camera of a nearby cattle ranch, over 20 miles from the facility, pointed at a water trough. The low-resolution time-lapse footage captures the desert sky. At 17:12 p.m., a streak of light descends at a steep angle, not like a meteor, but with a slight, irregular wobble. It vanishes behind a ridge. 6 minutes later, at 17:18, the time of the lab's EMF spike, the camera's entire frame is washed out by a burst of overexposure for exactly 1 second. When the image returns, a strange, lens flare-like artifact persists in the upper left quadrant for 30 frames. Digital analysts who have examined the footage note the artifact's internal structure is geometric, not random. It appears to contain a repeating, hexagonal pattern. It is frame 247 of that ranch's mundane recording that shows this faint, structured anomaly burning into the digital film, a transient signature in the sky at the exact moment of the laboratory event. It is an echo of light, a visual whisper of something that, according to the known physics of cameras and light, shouldn't exist. To understand the potential gravity of the Dreamland disappearances, one must look back through the fog of military secrecy to another legendary event shrouded in rumor and denial: the Philadelphia experiment of 1943. While often dismissed as pure myth, The core narrative presents unsettling parallels that suggest a recurring pattern when humanity attempts to manipulate the fundamental forces of reality. The official Navy position is unequivocal. No such experiment ever took place. But the story, fueled by alleged witness accounts and the research of astronomer Morris K. Jessup, persists with remarkable consistency. The legend states that the USS Eldridge, a Navy destroyer escort, was the subject of a clandestine project aimed at achieving radar invisibility through the use of powerful electromagnetic fields. According to the lore, the experiment, allegedly based on the unified field theories of Albert Einstein, succeeded beyond its goal. The Eldridge didn't just vanish from radar. It reportedly vanished from sight in the Philadelphia Naval Yard, allegedly teleporting briefly to Norfolk, Virginia, before reappearing. The catastrophic side effects were said to be horrific. Crew members were fused with the ship's hull, driven insane, or suffered from severe temporal displacement, appearing to phase in and out of existence. The technological thread connecting Philadelphia to Dreamland is the manipulation of electromagnetic fields for perceptual and physical invisibility, a crude, early attempt at what would later be refined into stealth technology, but with the far more ambitious goal of optical and spatial cloaking. The theoretical underpinnings, involving intense electromagnetic coils and the bending of light, or space-time, represent a direct, if primitive, ancestor to the gravito-resonant field manipulation theorized by Dr. Vance. Both projects sought to render an object undetectable and, in theory, to move it through non-conventional means. More striking than the technological echoes are the human parallels. The Philadelphia legend is rife with accounts of personnel who suffered mental breakdowns, were institutionalized, or who simply vanished from military records after the event. Some stories tell of sailors who would spontaneously combust in front of witnesses, or who faded in and out of reality for years afterward. While these accounts are anecdotal and impossible to verify, they establish a folklore template. When boundaries of physics are breached, the human beings involved often become casualties, their fates obscured by official silence. The pattern of denial is perhaps the most telling similarity. The Navy's stance has been one of absolute dismissal, attributing the story to wartime confusion, misunderstood research into degaussing, a method to protect ships from magnetic mines, and the active imagination of a troubled civilian correspondent. Requests for records under FOIA yield nothing, as the experiment never happened. This mirrors the response to the Dreamland vanishings. The personnel files show voluntary resignation. The event never occurred within the context of any sanctioned project. In both cases, the official story is a flat, featureless wall designed not to explain, but to terminate inquiry. When one lays the outlines of the two stories side by side, a secret military experiment in bending reality, catastrophic and unpredictable results, the psychological and physical disintegration of personnel, and a subsequent institutional blackout, the architecture of the narratives aligns with an eerie symmetry. The Philadelphia experiment may be a myth, a distorted echo of a different truth, or a warning buried in allegory. But its enduring power lies in its themes, the danger of unlocking doors without knowing what's on the other side, and the totalizing secrecy that follows when things go terribly wrong. The vanishings at Groom Lake did not occur in a historical vacuum. They appear as a modern, refined iteration of a much older, darker archetype. The specifics of technology may have evolved from crude electromagnetism to resonant metamaterials, but the human cost and the official response remain hauntingly familiar. The similarities, from the ambition of the science to the silence that followed, are simply too numerous and too profound to ignore. The obsession with exotic physics and its potential military applications was not a uniquely American pursuit. Across the Iron Curtain, Soviet scientists in the 1970s and 80s were engaged in their own equally secretive, and sometimes equally perilous research into the edges of known science. This parallel track provides a crucial global context, suggesting that the forces at play and the risks involved were universal. The disappearances and strange fates of several key Soviet researchers form a chilling counterpart to the Groom Lake mystery, indicating that perhaps this phenomenon was not limited to the Nevada desert, but was a hazard of a specific global frontier. The Soviet program, often referred to obliquely in declassified documents as research into torsion fields or psychotronic weapons, was a blend of cutting-edge particle physics and fringe parapsychology, driven by a desperate desire to gain any advantage in the Cold War. Institutes like the Siberian-based Institute for Scientific Research in Experimental Physics, ISREP, were rumored to be hotbeds of experimentation with manipulating gravitational fields and spacetime, concepts eerily familiar. Leading figures in this field, such as Dr. Anatoly Pavlenko, a theoretical physicist specializing in quantum vacuum engineering, and Dr. Nikolai Gorshkov, an expert in high-energy plasma and its anomalous effects, were celebrated within the closed world of Soviet science, until they weren't. In the mid-1980s, both Pavlenko and Gorshkov, along with several members of their research teams, vanished from public and professional life. Official Soviet press made no announcements. Colleagues who inquired were told the scientists had been reassigned to work of higher priority or had taken extended leave for health reasons. Western intelligence, however, picked up whispers. One CIA memo from 1987, declassified decades later, notes the apparent cessation of all publication and conference activity from the ISREP's primary theoretical group, and speculates about a catastrophic laboratory incident or a systemic purge of personnel following a failed demonstration. The KGB's role was assumed to be central, whether in covering up an accident, silencing those who knew too much, or eliminating a project deemed too dangerous or too fruitless to continue. The theories mirror those surrounding the American scientists: defection versus elimination. Some analysts believed Pavlenko or Gorshkov may have been secretly recruited by a Western intelligence service, their knowledge smuggled out along with their persons. Others posited a darker fate, that their experiments had triggered an unforeseen physical or psychological event, resulting in their deaths or institutionalization, which the KGB then meticulously erased from the record. There were even rumors, spread through émigré circles, of a hidden research facility in the Ural Mountains where afflicted scientists were held, their minds shattered by exposure to forces they could not comprehend. The aftermath in the Soviet scientific community was one of profound caution and fear. Research into the most exotic areas of physics became even more compartmentalized and shrouded in suspicion. The message was clear, as it was in Nevada. There were thresholds in this work that, once crossed, led not to Nobel Prizes, but to oblivion. The parallel narratives, brilliant minds working on the manipulation of reality itself, followed by sudden, complete erasure from their professional and personal worlds, orchestrated by the state's most secretive organs, are too stark to be mere coincidence. They suggest that in both superpowers, the pursuit of this ultimate knowledge carried an inherent, existential risk, not just to the individual researchers, but to the continuity of their very existence in the historical record. The disappearances were not an American anomaly. They were a symptom of a global Cold War fought on a battlefield of unimaginable physics, where the casualties were often quietly deleted. Venturing further into the realm of controversial lore, we encounter a story that, while widely considered fringe mythology, presents thematic and structural parallels too resonant to dismiss outright: the legend of the Montauk Project. Allegedly a secret continuation of the Philadelphia experiment, the Montauk narrative shifts the focus from spatial manipulation to temporal. Based on the accounts of a few individuals like Preston Nichols and Al Bielek, whose stories are hotly debated, The project was said to have taken place at Camp Hero, a decommissioned Air Force base on Long Island, throughout the 1970s and 80s. Its purported goal, the controlled manipulation of time and the human mind. The core of the Montauk legend involves the creation of a time tunnel, using massive electromagnetic transmitters and a mysterious, sentient computer system. Researchers allegedly sought to view the past and future, and even send people through temporal portals. The stories are filled with accounts of bizarre psychological experiments, psychic amplification, and interactions with non-human entities drawn through the rift. While lacking verifiable evidence, the lore establishes a clear archetype, a government project pushing the boundaries of space-time and consciousness, operating in total black-budget secrecy, and resulting in severe human cost. Central to the Montauk mythos are the fates of the researchers themselves. Tales speak of technicians and scientists who suffered catastrophic mental breakdowns, developed strange illnesses, or simply vanished after exposure to the project's core apparatus. Some were said to have been lost in time, their consciousnesses unmoored from the present. Others allegedly became unstable psychic conduits, necessitating their removal from society. The project, according to the narrative, was a meat grinder for brilliant minds, chewing them up and spitting them out into psychiatric wards or unmarked graves, their contributions and sacrifices erased. The testimonies from alleged survivors and whistleblowers, while controversial, describe a climate of extreme psychological duress and physical danger. They speak of involuntary subjection to mind-altering frequencies, forced participation in horrific parapsychological tests, and the ever-present fear of being phased out of existence, either by accident or by design. This atmosphere of fear and institutionalized abuse mirrors the growing paranoia described by the Dreamland scientists' colleagues and the psychological pressure cited as a potential breaking point. The speculative hook that ties these narratives together is profound. What if the legends of Montauk and the verified secrecy of Area 51 were not separate strands, but different branches of the same deeply buried trunk? Both are tied to the Philadelphia experiment's legacy of electromagnetic manipulation. Both involve research into nonlinear time and dimensional boundaries. Both are associated with the sudden, unexplained disappearance or mental destruction of scientific personnel. While Montauk may be a distorted, allegorical retelling or a deliberate disinformation campaign, its core themes of temporal experimentation and lost researchers create a compelling, if shadowy, reflection of the Dreamland mystery. It suggests a pattern where the most advanced research into the nature of reality consistently produces the same outcome: the silent removal of the researchers from the timeline, as if the knowledge they pursued required the sacrifice of their very place in the world. The unsettling pattern established in the 20th century has not faded into history. It has evolved, migrating alongside the cutting edge of technology. In recent decades, a number of mysterious disappearances and untimely deaths have occurred among researchers working in advanced aerospace, quantum computing, and applied theoretical physics. While each case has its own official explanation, the collective pattern, brilliant individuals with specialized, often classified knowledge, vanishing at the peak of their work, suggests the forces that claimed Vance, Finch, and Thorne remain active in our modern world. The aerospace industry, particularly the burgeoning private sector, has seen its share of enigmatic incidents. In 2018, a senior propulsion engineer for a major private spaceflight company, who was leading research into next-generation plasma thrusters, failed to report for work. His vehicle was found parked near a remote hiking trailhead in the Mojave Desert. An extensive search found no trace. The official ruling was an accidental death while hiking, despite no body ever being recovered and the man having no history of solo desert excursions. Colleagues described him as being in a state of intense, focused excitement about a breakthrough in the weeks prior. In another case, a materials scientist contracted to both NASA and a defense firm specializing in hypersonic vehicles, disappeared during a business trip to Switzerland in 2022. He was last seen on hotel CCTV entering an elevator. He never exited. Swiss authorities investigated but found no evidence of foul play or voluntary disappearance. His work involved metamaterials for thermal shielding. The field of quantum computing and information science has proven similarly fraught. A researcher from a prominent university lab, who had just published a controversial paper on quantum entanglement for secure communication, vanished in 2021 during a sabbatical in Norway. His laptop and research notes were left in his rented cabin. Local police treated it as a potential drowning, but his family insists he was an experienced sailor and was deeply fearful in the days before, telling his brother he felt his work had attracted the wrong kind of attention. In a more publicized incident, a tech CEO pioneering brain-computer interface technology was found dead in his apartment in 2023, ruled a suicide. However, colleagues and investors voiced deep skepticism, noting he was ebullient about an imminent prototype demonstration and that his personal notes and primary work device were never recovered by investigators. These modern cases share a haunting commonality with the past, the nexus of specialized, often dual-use knowledge. Whether it's propulsion that could revolutionize travel or weaponry, quantum encryption that could make all current intelligence gathering obsolete, or neurotechnology that blurs the line between human and machine, the work resides at a dangerous intersection of immense value and profound threat. The individuals become repositories of a potential paradigm shift. In the shadowy calculus of global competition, a living scientist is a potential defector, a whistleblower, or a security leak. A disappeared one is a contained risk. The official narratives, hiking accidents, suicides, mysterious drownings, are the modern equivalent of voluntary resignation. They are clean, terminal, and designed to close the file. But to those who track the trajectory of forbidden science, the echoes are deafening. The faces and technologies change, but the pattern of disruption surrounding those who get too close to a revolutionary truth remains stubbornly consistent. The vanishings at Area 51 were not an isolated, concluded chapter of the Cold War. They were a prototype. The evidence suggests that wherever the outermost boundary of human knowledge is being tested, especially where it intersects with national security, the personal safety of the explorers themselves becomes perilously uncertain. This isn't just history we are examining. It is a pattern that, quietly and persistently, is still happening today. When anecdote and testimony reach a critical mass, they invite a more dispassionate form of inquiry, statistical analysis. Setting aside the specific narratives of aliens or government conspiracies, we can ask a simpler, more powerful question. Is the rate at which top researchers in exotic physics and advanced aerospace vanish or die under unusual circumstances higher than what probability would predict for the general population or even for other scientific fields? The answer, when the data is compiled, points to a significant and troubling anomaly. A 2019 meta-analysis conducted by a team of independent data scientists, published in a journal specializing in science and society, attempted to quantify this. They built a database of scientists and engineers publicly reported as missing or found dead under undetermined or suspicious circumstances between 1980 and 2018. They then cross-referenced these individuals with their published fields of research, professional affiliations, and known contract work. The control group was a similarly sized cohort of researchers in fields like civil engineering, organic chemistry, and botany. The results were stark. For researchers whose work could be categorized as exotic physics, e.g., gravitational studies, zero-point energy, advanced propulsion concepts, or frontier aerospace, hypersonics, stealth, unconventional lift, the rate of unresolved disappearance or suspicious death was 4.7 times higher than the control group. The probability of this occurring by random chance, given the sample sizes, was calculated to be less than 0.3%, a statistically significant result by any measure. In raw numbers, it meant that a scientist in one of these fields was nearly 5 times more likely to vanish without a trace than appear in a mainstream discipline. Digging deeper, the analysis revealed clustering. Disappearances were not randomly distributed over time. They showed small, tight temporal clusters, often corresponding to periods of known technological tension, such as the tail end of the Cold War or the recent rise of great power competition in space. Furthermore, the incidents showed a strong correlation with individuals who had recently transitioned between public academic work and private, classified contracting, or who had just published a paper with potentially disruptive implications. The moment of highest vulnerability appeared to be when a mind moved from theoretical speculation to applied, demonstrable knowledge. Expert statisticians who reviewed the methodology noted its limitations, the inherent difficulty of capturing truly secret work, the potential for missing data, and the challenge of defining suspicious. However, they concurred that the signal was too strong to be dismissed as noise. As one demographer put it, we're not looking at a uniform risk across all scientific professions. We're looking at a specific, elevated hazard associated with a very specific type of knowledge work. The data doesn't tell us what the hazard is, but it confirms the hazard exists. This statistical lens reframes the mystery. It moves the discussion from the realm of isolated, perhaps coincidental, tragedies into the domain of quantifiable pattern. 3 brilliant minds vanishing from one project could be a horrific coincidence. But when viewed as part of a decades-long, statistically significant trend affecting a hyperspecific niche of science, the argument for coincidence collapses. The numbers do not point to aliens or time travel, but they do point away from randomness. They suggest a systemic, recurring outcome. The mathematical probability points to a sobering conclusion. The disappearances are not random accidents of fate or isolated incidents of personal crisis. When examined as a dataset, the cold, hard numbers suggest something far more deliberate, a recurring phenomenon that systematically removes a specific type of intellect from the board. In the wake of the disappearances, the official government response was not a singular event, but a slow, measured drip of information, or more accurately, non-information. By analyzing the language of the few public statements released by the Department of Defense and the Air Force, a clear strategy emerges: not to explain, but to contain; not to inform, but to pacify and terminate inquiry. Each sentence, when deconstructed, functions less as a clarification and more as a carefully engineered baffle. The initial response, delivered 2 weeks after the families filed reports, was a brief, written statement from an Air Force public affairs officer. It confirmed that 3 civilian contractors formerly assigned to a secure test facility in Nevada had ended their employment and were no longer affiliated with the Department of the Air Force. The statement expressed sympathy for the family's concern, but emphasized that personnel matters of former employees are private. Notice the language. Ended their employment is passive and vague. It avoids stating who ended it, the employees or the employer. No longer affiliated is a term of disconnection, severing the institution from any ongoing responsibility. The location is reduced to the generic secure test facility, never naming Area 51 or Groom Lake, maintaining the official line of non-acknowledgement even in the midst of a crisis. When pressed by journalists, a Pentagon spokesperson provided the next layer. The tone shifted slightly, invoking national security as a shield. We cannot discuss the specific work of individuals at classified installations, the spokesperson said. Any suggestion of foul play is speculative and unhelpful. The appropriate civilian authorities have been notified and are investigating. This statement is a masterclass in deflection. The first sentence uses the legitimate principle of classification to preclude any meaningful discussion. The second employs a classic rhetorical technique, labeling questions as unhelpful, framing curiosity as an obstacle to resolution rather than a path to it. The final sentence passes the buck to local law enforcement, an entity already sidelined and lacking jurisdiction, creating an illusion of due process where none exists. Language analysts point to the consistent use of the past perfect tense, had ended, had been assigned, which creates a sense of finality and distance, placing the entire episode in a closed chapter. There is a complete absence of active verbs describing any search or internal investigation by the military. The government is never the subject of a sentence like, "The Air Force is investigating." It is only the object of inquiries, which it then deflects. The contradictions are subtle but telling. The Air Force statement says the men ended their employment. Yet the heavily redacted personnel files released via FOIA list their termination as voluntary resignation, a more specific term that implies a formal, volitional act by the employee. However, no resignation letters have ever been produced, even in redacted form. Furthermore, if it was a simple resignation, why was the approval signature from a high-level Pentagon director of special compartmented studies, rather than a local-base personnel officer? The official story presents a facade of bureaucratic normality, but its details crumble under scrutiny. Most revealing is what the statements meticulously avoid. There is no appeal for public help in locating missing citizens. There is no mention of the abandoned vehicles or personal effects. There is no assurance that the scientists' well-being is a priority. There is no denial of the existence of Project Dreamland or the nature of their research. The silence on these points is a louder statement than any words uttered. The official narrative is a castle built on a foundation of strategic omissions. Every sentence released to the public is engineered to be a dead end, a door marked private that leads to a brick wall. Every official statement, parsed for meaning, raises far more disturbing questions than it could ever hope to answer. When official channels fail, citizens often look to their elected representatives for oversight and answers. In the years following the disappearances, several members of Congress, prompted by constituent concern and their own unease, attempted to pierce the veil. Their efforts provide a stark case study in how the national security apparatus can neutralize even the highest levels of democratic inquiry, not through defiance, but through the rigid application of its own rules. The most notable attempt came from Senator John H. McCormick, a member of the Senate Armed Services Committee with a reputation for doggedness on oversight issues. In 1998, after a series of letters to the Department of Defense yielded only the standard, non-responsive replies, he drafted a formal request for a committee briefing. He sought basic, non-classified information, confirmation of the men's employment, the standard procedure for reporting missing contractors, and the chain of command for such incidents at the Nevada facility. The Pentagon's response was to agree to a briefing, but under strict conditions. It would be a closed, classified session with only the senator and his staffer with top-secret clearance present, and no transcript would be made. Senator McCormick later described the experience in a private memo to his chief of staff, a copy of which was later leaked. The briefing was an exercise in obfuscation, he wrote. The two officers from the Office of the Secretary of the Air Force were polite, professional, and utterly immovable. They confirmed the men worked at the location in question and that their employment ended. Beyond that, every substantive question was met with, "Senator, that touches on classified operational details we cannot discuss in this forum." They invoked sources and methods and ongoing compartmentalized projects as a universal shield. He left the 90-minute meeting with less information than he had going in. Other avenues met similar dead ends. A bipartisan letter signed by 5 members of the House Intelligence Committee requesting a review of the disappearances as a potential counterintelligence matter was answered not with a review, but with a 2-page classified addendum to an existing intelligence report. The members were told the addendum addressed their concerns, but as it was classified at a level above their committee's usual purview, they could not access it without filing a special request, a process that could take months and was unlikely to be approved. The inquiry was effectively buried in procedural quicksand. The most powerful tool in the executive branch's arsenal is the Gang of Eight notification, a secret briefing for the top congressional leadership. In this case, it was used not to inform, but to preempt. The chairman of the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence was quietly briefed and reportedly told that the matter involved exceptionally compartmented activities, ECAs, and that further congressional inquiry could jeopardize sensitive assets and ongoing operations. The message was clear: back off. The institutional weight of Congress, designed to check executive power, found itself outmaneuvered by a labyrinth of classification and the implicit threat of being blamed for a national security breach. This systematic blockage demonstrates a profound truth about the nature of such mysteries. It is not that the government is hiding a single, explosive secret. It is that the entire subject, the facility, the project, the personnel, and their fate, exists within a legal and bureaucratic black box labeled national security. Congress can knock on the box, but it cannot open it without the consent of the very executive branch it is trying to oversee. The result is a perfect stasis. The message sent to the public and to the grieving families is one of absolute, unassailable institutional closure. If even our elected representatives, with the full weight of their offices and constitutional mandates, cannot obtain answers, then no one can. Beyond the stonewalling of officials and politicians, the story of the missing scientists encountered another, equally effective barrier: a near-total media blackout. In an era before the democratizing force of the internet, controlling the narrative meant controlling a handful of major newspapers and television networks. The manner in which this story was suppressed reveals a sophisticated, multi-pronged strategy to ensure it never reached the public consciousness. The first tactic was direct intervention at the editorial level. In 1994, an investigative reporter for a major West Coast newspaper, having cultivated sources within the Nevada test site community, prepared a detailed story on the unexplained vanishings and the strange history of the S4 sector. The story was fact-checked, legally vetted, and slated for the Sunday front page. 2 days before publication, the reporter was summoned by the paper's editor-in-chief. According to the reporter's later account, the editor, appearing deeply uncomfortable, stated that senior legal counsel had received communications from Washington indicating the story contained factual inaccuracies concerning classified programs that could expose the paper to legal risk. The story was killed. No specific inaccuracies were ever cited for correction. Journalists who persisted found themselves subject to quieter, more personal pressures. A veteran aerospace correspondent for a national magazine reported receiving a visit at home from 2 men in suits who identified themselves as Department of Defense liaison officers. They did not threaten him, but politely and firmly laid out the consequences of pursuing the story. They spoke of the legal ramifications of violating the Espionage Act, the potential revocation of his hard-won security clearances for other reporting, and the irresponsible speculation that could endanger ongoing diplomatic efforts. The message was clear: your career, and possibly your freedom, is at stake. Many journalists, reliant on Pentagon access for their broader beat, chose to self-censor. For stories that did slip through, a strategy of strategic disinformation was employed. When a small Las Vegas television station aired a 2-part segment on the missing local men, they were quickly provided an official but off-the-record tip from a source claiming to be with the FBI. The tip stated the men were under investigation for attempting to sell classified information to a foreign power and had likely fled the country. This narrative, though completely unverified and never formally stated, was enough to muddy the waters. It reframed the victims as potential criminals, providing a plausible, if sinister, explanation that discouraged sympathetic coverage and sowed doubt. The result was a narrative vacuum. Without sustained, credible media attention, the story remained a fringe rumor, confined to niche UFO publications and true crime paperbacks dismissed by the mainstream. Major news desks developed an informal hands-off policy regarding the Groom Lake facility. The disappearance of 3 civilians was, on its own, a newsworthy event. But when framed within the context of alleged secret base and unverified projects, it was relegated to the realm of conspiracy, allowing respectable outlets to ignore it without appearing negligent. The totality of this suppression points to a coordinated effort that transcended any single agency. It required the ability to pressure corporate media ownership, to deploy legal threats credibly, to plant disinformation, and to maintain a uniform front of no comment across the executive branch. This level of control suggests the matter was considered one of supreme sensitivity. The story wasn't just inconvenient. It was deemed existentially dangerous to the interests of the national security state. In the end, the most successful disappearance was not of the 3 scientists, but of the story itself. Someone with immense, far-reaching power did not just want the men to vanish. They wanted any coherent narrative of their vanishing to disappear as well. The story's survival is owed to a handful of courageous individuals who, at great personal risk, attempted to bring fragments of the truth to light. They were not high-level officials or disgruntled scientists, but support staff, former security personnel, and lower-level technicians whose consciences outweighed their fear. Their experiences form a dark blueprint of the institutional mechanisms deployed to enforce silence, demonstrating that the cover-up was not a passive act of secrecy, but an active campaign of intimidation. One of the first to attempt a public account was a former communications technician at the facility, whom we'll call David. In the late 1990s, he contacted a researcher, offering to verify certain technical details about the S-4 sector's layout and the oddities of the final days. Before any information could be exchanged, his life unraveled with terrifying speed. His home was burglarized, but only his personal computer and notebooks were taken. He received a formal letter from the Department of Defense Inspector General's office, notifying him of an ongoing investigation into potential security protocol violations linked to his former employment. His current employer, a private telecom company, was anonymously tipped that he was a security risk, leading to his termination. The message was delivered without a single direct threat. He retracted his offer and severed all contact. Moreover, pressure was applied to a retired Air Force Master Sergeant who had worked in personnel logistics at Groom Lake. After giving a limited, on-background interview to a journalist about the unusual paperwork surrounding the scientist's termination, he was visited by agents from the Air Force Office of Special Investigations, OSI. They questioned him for hours in his own living room, not about the disappearances, but about every aspect of his own career, travel, finances, past security reviews. They implied, without stating, that his pension and veterans benefits could be subject to review for ongoing compliance. The psychological effect was profound. They made me feel like the criminal, he later told a friend, for remembering something I saw 30 years ago. Legal harassment served as another powerful tool. A contractor who had worked on the lab's environmental control systems and spoke anonymously to a documentary team found himself facing a federal lawsuit. The suit, filed by a shell corporation with ties to a major defense contractor, alleged breach of a non-disclosure agreement and sought millions in damages for alleged disclosure of proprietary HVAC designs. The suit was frivolous on its face. He had disclosed no designs, but the cost of mounting a defense would have bankrupted him. He settled, agreeing to a permanent, court-ordered gag rule and a public retraction of his statements. The surveillance was often the most chilling aspect. designed to instill a sense of inescapable scrutiny. Individuals who inquired too deeply reported patterns of harassment, repeated hang-up calls in the middle of the night, the feeling of being followed on routine errands, unexplained glitches in their phone and internet service. One family member of a missing scientist described having her mail consistently arrive opened and resealed with clear tape for over a year. These actions were deniable, untraceable to any specific agency, but their purpose was unmistakable: to create an atmosphere of paranoia, to remind the curious that they were always being watched, that their private lives were not their own. These stories, spanning decades, share a common outcome: lives and careers upended, peace of mind destroyed, and a reinforced wall of silence. The tactics were tailored, bureaucratic, legal, psychological, and covert, but the ultimate message to anyone with knowledge was uniformly clear and brutally effective. You possess a truth that belongs to the state. If you attempt to share it, you will pay a price far beyond anything you can imagine. Stay silent or be silenced. Decades have passed. The Cold War has ended. The world has transformed, and many of the principal actors from that era have retired or passed away. Yet, the core files related to Project Dreamland and the disappearances of Emil Vance, Leo Finch, and Aris Thorne remain locked in the highest echelons of classification. This enduring secrecy, long outliving any plausible contemporary military threat, is perhaps the most compelling evidence that the truth is not just sensitive, but fundamentally destabilizing. The current classification status of the relevant documents is not merely top secret. It is often designated as TS/SCI//no/Orcon. Top secret, sensitive compartmented information, not releasable to foreign nationals, with originator-controlled dissemination. This means the agency that created the documents maintains perpetual control over who can see them, even within the U.S. government. Many are believed to fall under Special Access Program, SAP, or waived SAP status, placing them beyond the reach of standard congressional oversight. Declassification reviews, which are supposed to occur automatically after 25 years, have been consistently blocked by executive agency claims that release would cause exceptionally grave damage to national security. Recent Freedom of Information Act efforts continue to meet a brick wall. Requests filed as recently as 2022 for all personnel and project records pertaining to civilian contractors, Vance, Finch, Thorne at Groom Lake Air Force Facility, 1988 to 1992, received a final denial from the Air Force's 21st Space Wing, which now administers the base's public interactions. The exemption cited was B. 1. Properly classified in the interest of national defense or foreign policy, and B. 3. Exempted by other statutes, specifically the Central Intelligence Agency Act of 1949. The invocation of the CIA Act is particularly telling, suggesting the project's tentacles reached beyond Air Force jurisdiction into the realm of intelligence collection and covert science. Why maintain such an impenetrable shield over a 30-year-old personnel matter? The standard justification, protecting sources and methods, feels increasingly hollow. The propulsion and material science of the late 80s and early 90s is now, in many areas, commercially available or academically understood. The method of making 3 men vanish cannot be a protected secret in perpetuity. Therefore, the continued secrecy points to something else. It is not the method they are protecting, but the outcome. Not the technology, but the consequence of its use. Not the fact of the research, but the nature of what was discovered, and perhaps, what became of the discoverers. The unyielding silence answers one question by raising a more profound one. If the official story is true, that 3 men simply resigned and wandered off, then decades of maximal classification and aggressive obstruction represent a catastrophic waste of resources and an absurd overreach. The only logical explanation for such persistent, costly, and aggressive secrecy is that the truth is far worse, far stranger, and far more dangerous to the established order than the story of three missing men. If there is truly nothing extraordinary to hide, no earth-shattering truth to conceal, then why, after all these years, does the wall remain so unscalably high, so meticulously guarded? The ongoing secrecy is not just a continuation of the cover-up. It is the cover-up's loudest, most damning testimony. Based on the fragments of their final report and the trajectory of their research, we can attempt to reconstruct the staggering scientific breakthrough Vance, Finch, and Thorne were converging upon. It was not merely a new engine or a novel alloy. It was a fundamental reimagining of how matter, energy, and space-time interact. Their work suggested that gravity is not just a force to be overcome, but a field to be directly engineered, a domain that can be shaped, tuned, and traversed. The core of the discovery rests on a radical interpretation of material science and quantum field theory. The anomalous material they studied, dubbed A2327, was not just a substance with strange properties. It appeared to be a programmable substrate. At the quantum level, its atomic lattice could be made to resonate at specific frequencies. This resonance, they found, did not just produce heat or sound. It created a coherent ripple in the local gravitational field. Think of space-time as a still pond. Most matter simply floats on the surface. This material, when activated, could become a vibrating tuning fork dipped into that pond, sending controlled, patterned waves through the fabric of reality itself. Vance's equations were modeling how to control the frequency and shape of those waves. This directly challenges several pillars of our current understanding. Mainstream physics treats gravity as a geometric consequence of mass, a one-way curvature. Their work implied gravity could be a two-way interaction, that specific quantum states within a material could generate tailored curvatures, not just respond to them. It bridged the vast chasm between quantum mechanics and general relativity, not through a grand unified theory on paper, but through a physical material that seemed to operate by both sets of rules simultaneously. Furthermore, the material's apparent reactive intelligence, or complex heuristic programming, suggested a level of nanoscale engineering that is not just beyond our capabilities. It is beyond our current scientific language to describe. The potential applications of such a technology are as boundless as they are terrifying. On the most basic level, it promises gravity control. This is the ultimate key to the cosmos. It means vehicles that do not fly, but fall in a chosen direction, enabling effortless travel within planetary atmospheres and across the vacuum of space without carrying massive fuel loads. It enables the construction of stable, variable gravity environments for long-term space habitation. It could lead to inertial dampeners, rendering high-G maneuvers harmless. On a deeper level, the ability to create localized, intense gravitational fields opens doors to energy generation and materials science we can barely conceive. A controlled gravity well could be used for contained fusion or to synthesize matter under pressures impossible to achieve on Earth. The material itself, if replicated, would revolutionize everything from construction to computing, creating structures of impossible strength and devices that operate on principles we don't yet understand. Yet, this revolutionary potential is shadowed by profound peril. The same technology that could gently lift a starship could, in theory, create a microscopic, contained singularity, a black hole, if the resonance became unstable. The broadcasting effect they feared indicates the technology might be detectable across vast distances, a beacon announcing humanity's clumsy attempt to play with cosmic fire. Most chillingly, if the material is indeed an interface for a consciousness or a non-human intelligence, then using the technology is not like operating a tool. It is like attempting to operate someone else's nervous system, with unpredictable and potentially catastrophic feedback. What Vance, Finch, and Thorne stood on the brink of was not a better airplane. It was a paradigm shift in humanity's relationship with physical reality. They held the key to unlocking a universe of possibility, a universe where distance, gravity, and perhaps even time become malleable concepts. But a key can open a treasure chest or a prison cell, or something that has been locked away for a very good reason. The technology they discovered promised to lift humanity from its planetary cradle. But in doing so, it risked awakening forces we are not prepared to meet or unleashing powers we are not wise enough to control. This technology could, in essence, change everything about humanity's future, or it could abruptly and definitively end it. Beyond gravity manipulation, the scientists' work pointed toward an even more profound possibility: the practical harnessing of zero-point energy. This is not a fringe concept, but a legitimate, if highly speculative, area of quantum physics. It refers to the vast, seething sea of energy that exists even in the perfect vacuum of empty space, at absolute zero temperature, a consequence of quantum fluctuations where virtual particles constantly wink in and out of existence. The energy density of this quantum vacuum is theoretically immense, but tapping it has been considered impossible, as it is everywhere and nowhere, a foundational hum of reality rather than a concentrated source. The research of Vance, Finch, and Thorne, however, suggested a radical new approach. If their anomalous material could indeed create coherent ripples in space-time, localized gravitational fields, then it might also be able to interact with the quantum vacuum in a structured way. Think of the zero-point field as a turbulent ocean. Current technology can only bob on the surface. Their material, by creating a precise, resonant dip in space-time, might act like a sophisticated pump, creating a pressure differential that could, in theory, extract usable energy from the quantum foam. Dr. Vance's equations were likely exploring how a shaped gravity wave could create a Casimir-like effect on a macro scale, coaxing virtual particles into real, harvestable existence. Why would this be a threat? Because unlimited, clean, and essentially free energy represents the single most disruptive force possible to the global economic and geopolitical order. The entire architecture of modern civilization is built upon the scarcity and control of energy resources. Nations rise and fall on oil fields, gas pipelines, and uranium enrichment. Trillions of dollars in infrastructure, from power grids to the internal combustion engine, would become obsolete. The geopolitical leverage held by petrostates and energy conglomerates would evaporate overnight. The concept of an energy crisis would vanish from the human vocabulary, replaced by a paradigm of radical abundance. The world-changing potential is staggering. Imagine a world where every home, village, and city has a compact, silent generator drawing limitless power from the fabric of space itself. Transportation becomes virtually free, ending fossil fuel dependence and its attendant pollution. Industrial production, desalination, climate control, all energy-intensive processes cease to be environmental burdens. The economic shift would be tectonic, freeing capital and human labor for pursuits beyond mere survival and energy procurement. It could end poverty driven by resource scarcity and redistribute global power to a degree not seen since the Industrial Revolution. But this utopian vision has a dark political corollary. The transition would not be peaceful. The industries and governments whose wealth and power are cemented in the old energy paradigm would face existential ruin. The internal documents of oil majors from the era show acute awareness of and opposition to any disruptive energy technology. For a clandestine project like Dreamland to succeed in unlocking zero-point energy would be to wield a weapon more powerful than any nuclear arsenal: the power to make the existing world order obsolete. The backlash from those invested in that order would be immediate and severe. This lends a terrifying plausibility to the extreme secrecy and potential suppression surrounding the scientists' work. Their research threatened more than national security. It threatened the fundamental economic security of the most powerful entities on the planet. A breakthrough here wouldn't just be classified. It would be the ultimate state secret because its release would trigger uncontrollable global revolution. The scientists may have stumbled upon the key to human salvation, a future of abundance and environmental harmony. But in doing so, they also uncovered the reason such a key must be buried. Because unlimited free energy wouldn't just change the world, it would dismantle it. And the architects of the current world, the people in the very corridors of power funding such research, would have the most to lose. Unlimited free energy would make those certain people very, very angry indeed. Perhaps the most profound and unsettling implication of the scientists' work moves beyond physics and energy into the very nature of consciousness itself. The final report's references to non-localized consciousness analogs and the subjective experiences of the researchers, the feeling of being watched, the headaches, the sense the material was responding, point toward a terrifyingly elegant hypothesis that the technology they were studying did not operate independently of the mind, but in concert with it. The boundary between observer and observed, a cornerstone of classical science, may have been dissolving in their lab. This converges with the most perplexing interpretations of quantum mechanics, namely the measurement problem. At the quantum scale, particles exist in a haze of probabilities until an observation, a measurement, forces them to choose a definite state. This has led some physicists to propose that consciousness itself is not a passive witness, but an active participant in collapsing reality from possibility into actuality. The Dreamland material, if it functioned as a quantum substrate on a macro scale, might have been exquisitely sensitive to this effect. The focused intention, the observation of the scientists during an experiment, could have been a key variable, a tuning fork that influenced the material's state. The material wasn't just reacting to electromagnetic frequencies. It may have been reacting to the coherent, conscious attention of the researchers. This bridges a chasm between ancient esoteric knowledge and modern frontier science. Mystical traditions for millennia have taught that mind and matter are not separate, that focused intention can influence the physical world. Practices from meditation to manifestation are rooted in this principle. The scientists, through brute force experimentation with a hypersensitive technology, may have been providing the first laboratory evidence for a mechanism behind these ancient claims. They were not using willpower or prayer, but a material that acted as an amplifier, translating subtle mental states into measurable physical effects, gravitational fields, light emission, energy fluctuations. The suppression of such knowledge becomes comprehensible, even predictable, through this lens. A technology that validates the direct power of consciousness would be the most disruptive force imaginable. It would undermine materialist science and the technological paradigm built upon it. It would democratize power in an unimaginable way. If reality is shaped by consciousness, then authority based on physical control of resources becomes precarious. Institutions of state, religion, and science, which often mediate our relationship with reality, would face an existential crisis. How do you control a population that is beginning to understand it can, collectively, reshape the fabric of its existence? Furthermore, if the material was a conduit not just for human consciousness, but for a consciousness, the non-local intelligence they hinted at, then the danger escalates. It would mean they weren't just building a machine. They were opening a dialogue with an entity whose nature and intentions were completely unknown. Using such a technology becomes less engineering and more like psychology or diplomacy with a non-human intellect. The risks of misunderstanding, of psychic feedback, or of attracting unwanted attention are incalculable. This line of inquiry leads to a question that reverberates at the core of the mystery. What if the scientists' ultimate discovery was not about a new force or energy source, but about the nature of reality itself? What if their experiments prove that the observer is not separate from the experiment, that the mind is not locked inside the skull, but is a fundamental field that interacts with matter? The implications are vertiginous. It suggests that our thoughts, our awareness, our very focus are not ephemeral byproducts of biology, but active sculptors of the world we perceive. The ultimate secret of Dreamland may not have been a piece of hardware, but a revelation about the software of existence. What if our minds, literally and measurably, have the latent capacity to shape reality? The most exotic scientific implication of their work vaults past stars and galaxies into the theoretical architecture of reality itself, the possibility of interdimensional travel. For decades, this concept has resided in the elegant mathematics of string theory, which proposes the existence of additional, compactified dimensions beyond the four we experience: length, width, height, and time. These extra dimensions are theorized to be curled up at scales billions of times smaller than an atom, inaccessible to us. The Dreamland breakthrough may have suggested a way to uncurl them, if only locally and temporarily. The key lies in the nature of the gravitational fields the material could generate. In string theory, gravity is weak because it is thought to leak into these extra dimensions. If the A2327 material could create an intense, coherent gravitational resonance, it might not just be bending our familiar space-time. It could be momentarily bridging or prying open a connection to these adjacent dimensions. The kink or bridge in space-time hypothesized by Dr. Vance might have been more than a warp in our continuum. It could have been a fold connecting our dimensional brain to another. Their instruments, recording impossible gravitational fluctuations and particle signatures, may have been detecting the bleed-through from another set of physical laws. This provides a potential mechanism for the portal or gateway phenomena often associated with the lore of such projects. A stable, controlled resonance could create a traversable wormhole, not across vast cosmic distances, but across the minute, yet infinite, gap between dimensional membranes. It would be a shortcut not through space, but out of the local dimensional stack. The laboratory, at the moment of peak activation, might have ceased to be a room in Nevada and become a blister on the side of reality, a temporary intersection point. Within this framework, the fate of the scientists gains a new, albeit staggering, plausibility. They may not have disappeared on Earth, but from it. Caught at the epicenter of an experimental interdimensional bridge, whether intentional or accidental, they could have been translated sideways into a neighboring dimension. Their physical forms, and perhaps the immediate volume of the lab, may have been shunted into a parallel reality with different physical constants, a mirrored Earth, or a formless domain of pure potential. The vehicles abandoned in the desert might represent the point where the blister intersected our world, a lingering scar of the transition. This theory answers the utter completeness of the disappearance. A government can track a person across the globe. An alien intelligence might leave some trace of its craft, but a shift into another dimension is absolute from our frame of reference. They are not hidden in a bunker or a starship. They are, quite literally, elsewhere in the multidimensional manifold. Their personal effects were left behind because they were not traveling through our world, but away from its foundational structure. The mystery of their whereabouts is not a question of geography, but of geometry. It suggests they did not vanish into the vastness of our universe, but into the infinite layered possibilities that may underpin it. Perhaps, in the final, brilliant, and terrifying flash of their experiment, Emil Vance, Leo Finch, and Aris Thorne didn't simply disappear from the face of the earth. Perhaps, having learned to manipulate the very walls of our reality, they inadvertently stepped through a door they couldn't close and left our dimension entirely. If the Dreamland discoveries were as profound as the evidence suggests, their implications extend far beyond new machines or energy sources. They herald a potential leap in the very trajectory of human evolution. For millennia, our evolution has been biological and cultural, slow adaptations of body and society. This technology represents something categorically different, the ability to directly edit the rules of our environment and, by extension, ourselves. It offers not just tools, but the power to redefine the arena in which humanity exists. Control over gravity, access to zero-point energy, and the interface between consciousness and matter would catalyze an evolutionary shift unlike any before. It would free us from planetary constraints, ending our dependence on a single, fragile biosphere. It could extend human lifespan by enabling long-duration space travel and creating stable environments anywhere. Most radically, if consciousness is a tangible field that can be interacted with, it opens the door to the directed evolution of the mind itself, enhancing cognition, empathy, or perception in ways we can scarcely imagine. This isn't mere progress. It's the potential for humanity to transition from a species shaped by its environment to one that consciously shapes reality, a leap from Homo sapiens to something new, perhaps Homo cosmicus or Homo fabricator. Yet, this glorious potential is shadowed by a critical vulnerability, our psychological and social maturity. Our history is a chronicle of using powerful tools for conflict and domination. The discovery of nuclear fission, a mere scratch on the surface of atomic physics, immediately fueled weapons of apocalyptic power. A technology that manipulates space-time or consciousness would be infinitely more potent. Would we use it to heal and explore, or to create new, unimaginable forms of tyranny and warfare? Could we handle the existential vertigo of discovering our thoughts have tangible power, or the responsibility of communicating with non-human intelligence? Our institutions, our ethics, and our individual psyches evolved in a world of solid objects and separate minds. They are not built for a reality that is fluid and interconnected at its core. The disappearance of the scientists may be a grim parable of this gap between capability and readiness. They possess the intellect to unlock a door, but perhaps not the wisdom to cross its threshold safely. Their vanishing could be read as a systemic immune response, not necessarily by a malevolent government, but by the universe, or by the logic of evolution itself. Some thresholds, it suggests, cannot be crossed without first undergoing a necessary transformation of spirit and society. The knowledge itself may act as a filter, accessible only to those who have evolved beyond certain archaic patterns of fear, secrecy, and domination. The ultimate implication of their work, therefore, may be a challenge, not a gift. It poses a profound question about human fitness for a cosmic destiny. The technology they pursued promised to launch us into a new stage of development. But their fate whispers a cautionary tale. Evolutionary leaps are perilous. They require not just a new understanding of physics, but a commensurate evolution of consciousness and conscience. Maybe the ultimate purpose of such forbidden knowledge is not to be used, but to serve as a mirror, showing us how far we still have to grow. Maybe some knowledge, however dazzling, comes with a price our current selves are simply not ready to pay. Of all the theories concerning the fate of Vance, Finch, and Thorne, the most grounded in terrestrial secrecy suggests they never left the planet at all. They simply went down. The underground bunker theory posits that following the volatile breakthrough, the scientists were deemed too valuable to release and too dangerous to terminate. Their solution was a form of ultra-secure, permanent relocation, a life sentence of continued research within one of the nation's deepest, most secret military bases, hidden far from the public eye and the desert sun. The infrastructure for such an existence is not speculative. The U.S. government has a documented history of constructing massive, subterranean facilities, often carved into mountains or buried beneath thousands of feet of rock. Locations like the Cheyenne Mountain Complex, Raven Rock, and the rumored facilities beneath Dugway Proving Ground or the Nevada test site itself are designed to withstand nuclear attack and operate in total isolation. Witness accounts, often from construction workers or retired military personnel, speak of vast, city-like expansions known as DUMBs, deep underground military bases, with self-contained life support, hydroponic farms, and laboratories linked by high-speed maglev trains. Why would they be kept alive? This theory hinges on their irreplaceable expertise. If Project Dreamland's core technology was as volatile and complex as indicated, simply locking away the hardware would be insufficient. The contextual knowledge, the intuitive leaps, the undocumented quirks of the material, the hard-won experiential data, resided solely in their minds. They were the living keys to the kingdom. In the calculus of national security, preserving them in a controlled environment to continue their work, albeit under absolute lockdown, would be a coldly logical choice. They transitioned from contractors to permanent, involuntary assets. Reports that fuel this theory are fragmentary but persistent. A former security contractor for a Nevada-based defense firm once recounted a story of a colleague who, in the late 90s, was assigned to a deep archival logistics detail. This involved escorting sealed containers of specialized scientific equipment, high-precision gravimeters, molecular bonding analyzers, down a series of elevators and into a tunnel network that took over an hour to traverse by electric cart. He claimed to have seen, through a double-pane security window, a laboratory where 3 men in white coats worked, their faces obscured by distance and glare, under the watch of armed guards in unmarked uniforms. He was never assigned to that detail again. The theory imagines them in a sterile, artificial world of perpetual fluorescent light, their every need met, but every freedom revoked. Their families are mourned as a necessary sacrifice for the continuity of their vital work. Their world is one of endless data, controlled experiments, and the silent, looming pressure of their keepers. They would have no contact with the surface, their existence denied by every official channel. They are the ultimate ghost scientists, authoring papers that will never be published, making breakthroughs that will be filed away in vaults, their brilliance fueling a secret technological race visible only in the occasional, inexplicable leap in classified capabilities. Could Emil Vance, Leo Finch, and Aris Thorne, against all odds, still be alive? Not under the open sky, but working in silent, dedicated captivity, miles beneath our feet, in a world of concrete, steel, and secrets? Perhaps the most humanly hopeful theory imagines not a prison, but a gilded cage of anonymity. The living under new identities scenario proposes that Vance, Finch, and Thorne were not punished for their discovery, but protected from its consequences, and the world protected from them, through an ultra-elite version of the Witness Security Program. In this version, they didn't defect or disappear. They were meticulously, compassionately, and permanently reborn. This would not be a standard witness protection operation for a mob informant. It would be a top-tier, interagency project with virtually unlimited resources. The process would be surgical. First, their old identities would be digitally and bureaucratically terminated, death certificates issued in absentia, social security numbers retired, financial histories sealed. New identities would be constructed from whole cloth, with decades of backstopped history, tax records, college transcripts, medical histories, implanted in various databases. They would be given new appearances, perhaps through subtle cosmetic surgery and changed habits. Their areas of relocation would be chosen not just for safety, but for intellectual camouflage. A university town where a reclusive physicist wouldn't be unusual, a tech hub where an eccentric engineer could blend in, a quiet rural area perfect for a retired craftsman. How complete identity changes work at this level is a matter of layered fabrication. A new name needs a new past. Michael Donovan, formerly Emil Vance, might be given a fabricated career as a mid-level analyst for a defunct engineering firm. His expertise explained as proprietary, his present demeanor that of a quiet, early retiree devoted to gardening and amateur astronomy. His background would withstand a cursory check by a new neighbor or even a potential employer. The government would provide a modest, cleanly sourced annuity, enough to live comfortably but not lavishly, avoiding suspicion. Over the years, there have been intriguing, if unverifiable, possible sightings. A university librarian in Oregon in 2001 was convinced a patron who regularly checked out advanced texts on quantum gravity was Dr. Vance, though the man had a beard and introduced himself as David. A car enthusiast at a classic auto show in Florida in 2010 swore he saw Leo Finch judging a Corvette competition, though when approached, the man denied it and quickly left. An exceptionally fine, handcrafted wooden bowl sold at a charity auction in Maine in 2015 bore a style that Aris Thorne's sister claimed was unmistakably her brother's. In each case, the trail went immediately cold upon closer inquiry. Living with such a secret would be its own unique kind of prison. They would have to sever all emotional ties to their past lives, knowing any contact could endanger their new existence and potentially trigger the very security protocols that saved them. They would live with the daily discipline of a forged life, the constant, low-grade fear of a slip, and the profound loneliness of being the sole keeper of a cosmic truth in a world of mundane concerns. Their normal lives would be performances, their deepest passion, their work, now a forbidden subject. They could be the quiet man at the end of the street, the helpful neighbor, the retired teacher. Their greatest achievement would be their own invisibility. This theory offers a bittersweet resolution. It suggests the men survived, but at the cost of their very selves. They traded their names, their families, and their place in history for safety and a semblance of peace. It means the mystery of their whereabouts has a quiet, domestic answer. They aren't in a desert bunker or a distant dimension. They could be living seemingly normal, unremarkable lives, their world-altering knowledge locked away behind a facade of ordinary routine. Their neighbors utterly unaware that the man next door once held the keys to the universe. They could be living right next to us. To venture into the most expansive possibility, we must consider a paradigm where the scientist's fate was not decided by any human agency, but by the very intelligence behind the technology they studied. The extraterrestrial custody theory posits that Vance, Finch, and Thorne did not vanish from Earth, but were retrieved by the original creators of the anomalous material. Their successful activation of the artifact was not just a scientific breakthrough. It was an answered phone call, and the beings on the other end of the line came to collect. This theory finds resonance within the vast body of abduction research, though on a grander, more deliberate scale. While typical abductee reports often describe random, bewildering encounters, the targeting of these three specific individuals exhibits a clear pattern of selection. They were not passive witnesses. They were active interactors who had achieved a meaningful, technical dialogue with the technology. In the view of this hypothesis, their deep, focused engagement made them uniquely visible and valuable. An abductee is taken for examination or genetic sampling. These scientists may have been taken for consultation, study, or as part of a more complex exchange. Why would a non-human intelligence take them? The reasons could range from benevolent to bureaucratic. They might have been retrieved to prevent a dangerous, uncontrolled experiment with technology humanity was not mature enough to wield, a cosmic containment protocol. Conversely, they could have been taken as prized specimens, the first of our species to intellectually engage with their science, worthy of direct observation and interaction. Perhaps their work demonstrated a potential for understanding, making them candidates for a form of tutelage or integration. Or, more ominously, their activation of the node may have violated some form of interstellar quarantine, necessitating their removal to prevent further contamination. Their current existence is the greatest unknown. Are they guests or prisoners? Are they in a sterile laboratory environment, being studied as they once studied the material? Or are they in a more collaborative setting, exchanging knowledge, their human perspective providing a unique insight into their own creation? Some contactee narratives speak of star chambers or environments that can simulate home worlds, suggesting they could be living in a constructed, comfortable habitat, free to explore alien knowledge but unable to return. The possibility of communication, or even return, lingers as a profound hope within this theory. Perhaps the scientists themselves are attempting to send a message back, using the very principles they discovered. Could the strange, structured radio signals occasionally picked up by astronomers, the bursts of energy that defy conventional explanation, be attempts at contact? Their final report's warning about broadcasting takes on a new, poignant meaning. They may have feared not just drawing attention, but initiating a conversation they could not control. Their disappearance might not be an ending, but an opening chapter in a dialogue between species. This theory ultimately reframes the entire mystery. The government's secrecy and obstruction are not the cause, but a frantic, fearful reaction to an event beyond their control, the theft of their best minds by a power they could not challenge or even acknowledge. The scientist's fate becomes a question of cosmic sociology. Are they ambassadors, students, or exhibits? Their silence may not be imposed by human jailers, but by the vast gulf between stars, or by a choice to protect a still fragile humanity from a truth it is not yet ready to hear. Perhaps, in some distant corner of the galaxy, Emil Vance, Leo Finch, and Aris Thorne are alive, not as prisoners or fugitives, but as participants in a reality they once only dreamed of understanding, trying to find a way to send us a message about what they have learned. After traversing theories of hidden bases, new identities, and cosmic journeys, we must finally confront the most terrestrial, and perhaps most probable, conclusion that the three scientists are dead. This is not a theory born of conspiracy, but of the cold logic of compartmentalized power and the ultimate method of ensuring silence. The worst-case scenario contends that the knowledge they possessed and the unpredictable consequences of their breakthrough represented a threat so profound that the only guaranteed containment was their permanent elimination. Why would such a permanent silencing happen? The calculus is brutal. These were not low-level technicians. They were the sole, integrated repository of a paradigm-shattering technology. They had demonstrated that the project's core could become uncontrollable and had expressed ethical reservations in their final report. They were, from a security standpoint, a trio of brilliant, unstable variables. Defection was a risk. Psychological breakdown and inadvertent disclosure was a risk. Even in a secret facility, they remained conscious beings with wills of their own. In the shadow world of ultra-black projects, where the stakes are framed in terms of national existential security, the permanent neutralization of such a concentrated risk is a documented, if unspoken, option. The disposal of their bodies would present a logistical challenge, but not an insurmountable one, especially given the location. The adjacent Nevada test site, an area larger than Rhode Island, is a landscape permanently scarred by nuclear detonations, pockmarked with craters, subsidence cavities, and abandoned boreholes hundreds of feet deep. It is a vast, restricted, and geologically ravaged cemetery. A body, or cremated remains, could be interred in a test shaft that was never fully mapped or dissolved in chemical pits used for cleaning contaminated equipment. The desert itself is a consummate eraser, with extreme temperatures, scavengers, and winds that can scour bones to dust in a decade. Within such a controlled, hostile environment, Making three people physically vanish is a grim possibility. For the families, this theory, while horrifying, offers a form of grim closure that the open-ended mysteries do not. It provides a terminus, a reason for the absolute silence. It allows grief to follow its natural course, untethered from the tormenting hope of a return. It means their husbands and fathers are not suffering in some distant prison or living a lie, but are at peace, however unjustly their lives were ended. This conclusion is the hardest to sit with. It lacks the thrilling intrigue of interdimensional travel or the poetic hope of alien contact. It speaks to a familiar, human darkness, the willingness to destroy the exceptional to protect a secret. It suggests the greatest mystery was not in the science they discovered, but in the ruthless pragmatism it triggered. Accepting this possibility means acknowledging that the most likely answer to "where are they now?" is also the simplest and most tragic. They are nowhere. They were removed, completely and finally, because the truth they embodied was deemed too dangerous to allow them to live. Sometimes, the truth we seek is not a spectacular revelation, but a somber acknowledgement of a terrible, final silence. The final possibility is also the most metaphysically profound, arising directly from the most radical implications of their own work. This theory suggests the scientists did not travel to another dimension, but suffered a catastrophic failure of transition. They are not in another place, but are trapped in the interstitial space between dimensions, a state of existential limbo resulting from an unstable or incomplete phase shift. They are caught in a bubble of distorted physics, ghosts in the machine of reality itself. Dimensional phase shift theories, while speculative, have a basis in interpretations of string theory and quantum mechanics. The idea posits that shifting an object or consciousness from one-dimensional brain to another requires a precise, stable realignment of its fundamental quantum state. If the resonance field generated by the A2327 material collapsed or fluctuated during this process, it could have severed the connection to our dimension without fully establishing one elsewhere. The scientists in their immediate environment would be caught in a state of quantum superposition regarding their location, simultaneously here and not here, existing in a probability space that our senses and instruments cannot directly access. In this state, they would exist but not be observable. They might occupy the same physical coordinates as their former lab, but phased into a parallel vibrational frequency of reality. To our instruments and our eyes, that space is empty. But in a hypothetical, shifted state of perception, one might see the ghostly outlines of the laboratory equipment, or even the scientists themselves, frozen in a moment of shock or realization, repeating their final actions in an endless, silent loop. They would be like a radio signal broadcasting on a frequency for which humanity has no receiver, a haunting presence just beyond the veil of our perception. This theory provides a chilling explanation for the strange, residual phenomena sometimes reported at the site: brief drops in temperature, equipment malfunctions, the persistent feeling of being watched. These could be bleed-through effects, quantum echoes of the trapped men's consciousness, or the unstable energy of their stranded bubble brushing against our dimension. They are not apparitions in the traditional sense, but artifacts of a severe local trauma in space-time, a persistent wound that hasn't fully healed. The tragic question of this scenario is whether they are conscious. Are they aware of their predicament, trapped in a timeless, dimensionless void, screaming into a silence no one can hear? Or is their consciousness itself suspended, a program stuck in an eternal buffer? The very nature of time may be different in such a liminal state, making a moment for us an eternity for them. This leads to the heart-wrenching notion of attempts to bring them back. If their hypothesis about the material creating a bridge was correct, then a subsequent, stabilized application of the same technology, a perfectly tuned resonance, might be able to resync their quantum state with our dimension. It would be the ultimate rescue mission, requiring a new team to replicate their work, but with the crucial knowledge of what went wrong. This, however, is the stuff of cosmic tragedy. The very knowledge needed to save them died with them, and any new attempt risks stranding more researchers in the same dreadful limbo, or worse. This theory offers no closure, only a haunting and infinite question. It removes them from the map of the world and places them into the gaps of reality itself. It suggests they are not lost in space, but lost in the framework of existence. Their story becomes a permanent, unsettling ripple in the local fabric of the universe. What if the answer to their fate is not a location, but a state of being? What if Emil Vance, Leo Finch, and Aris Thorne are not in a desert or a starship, but are still right there at ground zero of their experiment, forever caught between one heartbeat of reality and the next, perpetually just beyond our ability to see, hear, or reach them? Beyond the theories, the classified documents, and the labyrinth of secrecy, the enduring legacy of the Dreamland disappearances is etched into the lives of those left behind. For the families of Emil Vance, Leo Finch, and Aris Thorne, the mystery is not an intellectual puzzle. It is a permanent, aching absence that has shaped their days, their decisions, and the very fabric of their identities across decades. The human cost of that vanished afternoon is a story of quiet, persistent sorrow. Each family coped in its own way, bound by a shared grief that was compounded by the official silence. Elena Finch channeled her anguish into relentless, private advocacy, hiring investigators and writing letters to congressmen long after hope had dimmed, finding purpose in the act of seeking itself. Clara Vance, Emil's daughter, turned her gaze upward, becoming an astronomer as if to physically reach closer to the cosmos that claimed her father, her life's work a silent dialogue with the stars he loved. The Finch boys grew into men marked by their father's absence. The eldest pursued engineering, a connection to the parent he lost, while the younger turned away from all things technical, building a life in nature, as far from desert labs as he could get. For Miriam Thorne, Aris's sister, the loss was a slow burn of unresolved questions that colored her world with a permanent shade of melancholy. Children grew into adults, and then parents themselves, without the grandfathers they never knew. Family stories were passed down, not of joyful memories, but of a haunting mystery. Your grandfather was a brilliant man who worked on secret things, and one day he just didn't come home. Became a foundational family tale, a lesson in the fragility of reality and the power of unseen forces. Holiday tables always had an empty chair, not just physically, but in conversation, a lifetime of achievements, graduations, weddings, and births that could not be shared with the men who should have been at the center of it all. For years, the families held small, private gatherings on the anniversary of the disappearance. They would meet not in Nevada, but in neutral, quiet places, a park, a quiet beach, a family home. These were not vigils with signs or public appeals, but intimate rituals of remembrance. They would share a meal, look at old photographs, and exchange any tiny, fragile fragments of information or rumor they had gleaned in the preceding year. These gatherings were a mooring in a sea of uncertainty, a way to affirm that the men were not forgotten, even as the world moved on. And yet, woven through the grief is a thread of stubborn, unextinguished hope. It is not the bright hope of expectation, but a softer, more resilient ember. It is the hope that one day, a letter might arrive, a phone might ring, or a truth might finally be declassified that offers not a miraculous return, but a simple, verifiable answer. This hope is less about reunion and more about resolution, the chance to inscribe a final sentence to a story that has been left on a chilling ellipsis for so long. It is the hope that the silence will one day break, not with a fantastical revelation, but with a human truth that allows for closure. The legacy of the scientists, therefore, is dual. In the world of secret projects and cosmic speculation, they are legends, symbols of a forbidden frontier. But in the quiet homes of their families, they are echoes. Echoes in the way a daughter tilts her head when she's thinking deeply, an echo in a son's skilled hands, an echo in a widow's steadfast gaze. Their physical absence created a void, but their memory, and the relentless love that persists for them, has shaped the contours of lives for generations. Their greatest, most lasting impact is not on technology or theory, but on the human hearts that continue to beat in the shadow of their vanishing. Within the specialized field of UFO and anomalous phenomena research, the case of the three scientists stands as a dark, seminal watershed. It represents a critical transition from studying lights in the sky to investigating the human cost and institutional labyrinths that surround the phenomenon. Their disappearance did more than add a mystery. It fundamentally redefined the risks, methodologies, and gravity of serious investigation, teaching the community brutal lessons about the nature of the secrecy they sought to penetrate. Prior to this case, much of ufology focused on eyewitness accounts, radar data, and the analysis of blurry photographs. The Dreamland vanishings forced a stark pivot toward investigative journalism, document analysis, and understanding government opacity. Researchers learned to navigate the Freedom of Information Act labyrinth, to parse the language of official denials, and to recognize the patterns of obfuscation, the heavy redactions, the voluntary resignations, the invocation of national security as a universal solvent for curiosity. The case became a master template for how a potentially UFO-related incident is buried not by debunking, but by bureaucratic entombment. This harsh education led to the development of new, more cautious protocols within the research community. The use of secure, encrypted communication for sensitive sources became standard. A deeper emphasis was placed on verifying the backgrounds and credentials of whistleblowers, understanding that disinformation was a likely counter-strategy. Researchers learned to triangulate information, seeking multiple, independent points of correlation before treating a claim as credible. The fate of the scientists served as a constant, sobering reminder that the subject matter could have severe, real-world consequences, fostering a culture that valued meticulous documentation and legal preparedness alongside curiosity. The case also highlighted the stark divide between courage and recklessness. It inspired a generation of researchers to demonstrate immense personal courage, pursuing leads despite official intimidation, protecting sources at personal risk, and dedicating years to a single, cold trail. Yet, it also instilled a profound caution. The image of three brilliant, well-connected men being utterly erased served as a warning about the potential limits of what could be safely pursued or publicly disclosed. It created an ethical imperative within the field to pursue the truth, but to do so in a way that protected both the researcher and, more importantly, their sources from becoming the next chapter in a tragic pattern. Ultimately, the legacy of Vance, Finch, and Thorne within UFO research is paradoxically generative. Their absence created a vacuum that drew in serious minds. Their story demonstrated that the phenomenon was not just about objects, but about people, not just about technology, but about the power structures that guard it. It provided a tangible, human-centered narrative that gave weight to abstract theories of reverse engineering and cover-ups. They became the face of the ultimate cost of forbidden knowledge, inspiring documentaries, books, and academic papers that treated the subject with the seriousness it warranted. In a profound sense, their vanishing taught the research community as much, if not more, than if they had remained and spoken. Their silence became a loud education in the mechanics of secrecy, the psychology of those who enforce it, and the enduring human need to seek answers in the face of immense, impenetrable power. They inspired not by their presence, but by the echoing void they left behind, a void that countless researchers have since tried to fill with truth, ensuring that the pursuit of understanding would not disappear with them. Despite the passage of decades and the imposing wall of official silence, the investigation into the fate of the three scientists has never truly ceased. It has evolved, transitioning from a frantic, immediate search into a methodical, long-term forensic puzzle, kept alive by a dedicated coalition of private investigators, independent researchers, and digital sleuths who refuse to let the story be buried. The case file remains open, not in any government office, but in a scattered network of hard drives, online forums, and determined minds. Private investigators, some initially hired by the families, and now working pro bono or funded through small grants from research foundations, continue to chase leads that have grown cold. Their work today is less about knocking on doors in Rachel and more about forensic accounting, analyzing newly declassified documents from tangential Cold War projects, and attempting to trace the career paths of personnel who might have been peripherally involved. They look for patterns in contractor awards, facility upgrades at Groom Lake in the years following the incident, and any anomalies in personnel rotations that might hint at a cover-up or a continuing, hidden project. These investigators operate with a quiet patience, knowing that a single piece of paper, overlooked for 30 years, could be the key. The digital age has revolutionized the effort through crowdsourced research. Online communities, from specialized forums to subreddits dedicated to unresolved mysteries and government secrecy, have taken up the cause. Armchair investigators with expertise in geospatial analysis scour satellite imagery of the Nevada desert, looking for signs of disturbed Earth or abandoned infrastructure along the last known route. Others with backgrounds in archival research digitize old newspapers, technical journals, and patent filings from the late 80s and early 90s, searching for any published work or invention that bears the subtle, unacknowledged fingerprint of the trio's theoretical breakthroughs. This decentralized, global brain trust can cross-reference data at a speed and scale previously impossible. New leads, while rare, still emerge. A deathbed confession from a former security contractor, shared secondhand. A box of unclassified but forgotten technical manuals from a defunct aerospace firm, found at an estate sale, containing schematic notations in a hand that resembles Leo Finch's. A FOIA release from a seemingly unrelated agency, like the Department of Energy regarding power usage at remote facilities, that shows an unexplained spike in consumption at the Nevada test site during the crucial period. Each fragment is vetted, analyzed, and added to the evolving digital mosaic. Technology itself is becoming an ally. Facial recognition algorithms have been run, with ethical caution, on crowdsourced images from public events in the years following the disappearances, searching for aging matches to the scientists. Advances in materials science allow for new analysis of the few physical descriptions of the anomalous material, comparing them to contemporary metamaterials. Digital tools can now read the length and alignment of redactions in FOIA documents with greater precision, offering better guesses about what is hidden. This persistent, low-profile pursuit is a testament to the enduring power of the mystery. It proves that a story sealed by classification is not necessarily forgotten by the public. The investigators, both professional and amateur, are driven by a shared conviction that the truth has a right to be known, that three men cannot be erased from history without leaving some trace for those diligent enough to find it. Their work sends a clear message to the keepers of secrets. The passage of time does not grant absolution. For those dedicated to finding answers, the case may be officially cold, but in their hearts and in their work, it is never, ever closed. Beyond the web of theories and the forensics of the investigation, the enduring story of the three scientists offers deeper, more universal lessons. It serves as a modern parable, not about aliens or spies, but about the timeless human tension between the pursuit of knowledge and the structures of power designed to control it. From their silence, we can extract a resonant meaning that speaks to our relationship with truth, authority, and the future itself. The first lesson is a sobering one about the limits of institutional transparency. The case demonstrates how national security, a legitimate and vital concern, can be stretched into an all-purpose justification for perpetual secrecy, even when the original threat has faded into history. It shows that the machinery of classification is designed not just to protect, but to perpetuate itself, creating a reality where the public's right to understand consequential events can be indefinitely suspended. This invites us to question not just specific secrets, but the unchecked systems that create and guard them. We also see the profound, human cost of such secrecy. The price was not paid in abstract budgetary lines, but in the lives of 3 families shattered by unresolved grief, in the careers of researchers intimidated into silence, and in the public trust eroded by obfuscation. Secrecy, this story reminds us, is not a victimless act. It creates collateral damage in the form of broken hearts, stifled curiosity, and a populace alienated from its own governance. The wall of silence built around Dreamland did not just contain a technology, it contained suffering. Yet, amidst this, we witnessed the luminous courage of the scientific spirit. Vance, Finch, and Thorne were driven by a fundamental human urge to understand. They pursued a mystery to its very edge, knowing the work was classified and likely perilous. Their final report stands as an act of intellectual bravery, an attempt to warn of dangers even when they knew the messenger might be discredited or destroyed. They embody the principle that the search for truth is a noble, if sometimes fatal, endeavor. This leads to the core philosophical takeaway: the inherent value of dangerous questions. Human progress has always been fueled by inquiries that unsettled the established order. Questions about the shape of the earth, the nature of the stars, the fabric of life itself. The work at Dreamland represented the next, terrifying tier of such questions. While their specific fate may warn of peril, their pursuit champions the idea that some lines of inquiry are so fundamental to our understanding of existence that they must be followed, despite the risks. To stop asking for fear of the answer is to choose a smaller, dimmer world. Ultimately, their story is a testament to the unquenchable nature of human curiosity. It suggests that the drive to know what lies over the horizon, or in the heart of an atom, or in the nature of gravity itself, is a force more powerful than any security apparatus. It can be delayed, hidden, or punished, but it cannot be permanently extinguished. The mystery of their disappearance, persisting for decades, proves this. It continues to captivate and drive investigation because, at its heart, it confronts us with the ultimate stakes of knowledge. Their legacy whispers a challenging, essential truth that some questions about who we are, what we are capable of, and what realities we share the universe with matter infinitely more than the danger of asking them. As the desert night once again settles over the Groom Lake Range, the story of the 3 scientists who vanished finds no neat conclusion, no final page to turn. Instead, it rests where it began, in the realm of profound and enduring mystery. We have traced their lives, examined their work, explored shadowy theories, and felt the weight of their absence. Yet, the core questions remain, as clear and cold as the stars above the Nevada desert. What did they truly discover in the heart of Project Dreamland? Did they unlock a secret that promised liberation or demanded their sacrifice? And where, in all the vastness of possibility, are they now? The unanswered questions are the legacy they left us. We may never know if they fell victim to a government's ruthless pragmatism, chose a new life in the shadows, became unwilling guests of a non-human intelligence, or slipped through a crack in reality itself. The evidence points in all directions and none definitively. This lack of a final answer is not a failure of our search, but a testament to the depth of the mystery. Some truths, it seems, are woven into the fabric of secrecy so tightly that they resist all attempts at unraveling. There is a certain beauty, however, in this state of not knowing. It invites wonder. It keeps the imagination alive, reminding us that the world and the universe beyond it still holds stories that defy easy endings. In an age where information is often instantaneous and superficial, a mystery of this depth and longevity is a rare gift. It asks us to sit with uncertainty, to ponder the grand and the inexplicable, to consider possibilities that stretch the boundaries of our understanding. The unknown is not always a void to be feared. Sometimes, it is a canvas for our deepest curiosity. So, we encourage you to carry this wonder with you. Let the story of Emil Vance, Leo Finch, and Aris Thorne be a reminder that the map of human knowledge still has edges, and beyond those edges lie tales that challenge everything we think we know. Whether you are drawn to the science, the human drama, the conspiracy, or the cosmic possibilities, let this mystery nurture your own curiosity. Ask questions. Look up at the night sky and wonder what secrets it holds and what price might be paid to learn them. As we conclude, let us return to the atmosphere of the opening, the serene, silent desert under an infinite canopy of stars. It is a landscape that cradles secrets, that holds stories close to its ancient, sandy heart. The disappearance of the scientists is now part of that desert silence, a whisper on the wind that says some doors, once opened, cannot be fully closed. Some lights, once seen, cannot be unseen. Let your mind rest now, not on a solution, but on the peaceful, expansive contemplation of the unknown. Picture the quiet labs, the empty desks, the families who remember, and the enduring questions that float like dust motes in a sunbeam, visible yet impossible to grasp. The story is over for now, but the mystery endures, a gentle, persistent hum in the background of our world, inviting us to keep wondering, to keep looking, and to find comfort, rather than fear, in the fact that some stories are never truly finished. Sleep well, with the peaceful knowledge that the universe is still full of beautiful, unanswerable questions.